My first ever encounter was when I was around 7 and my family was all around the table. I will never forget the order we sat in, nor what happened. My mother sat in front of me while my sister was beside me. Father was next to Mom and my back was turned to the kitchen. My brother sat next to my mom in front of my sister, a family of 5. We were eating, and then the window straight across from my dad at the right of my direction shone with a very bright light. Everyone seemed frozen but my mom and I. My mom told me to run and hide. My mind was blanked out and I didn't think at all. I just got up and ran to my mother's room, where I felt my mind was telling me would be the safest place. Once I entered my mom's room, I went straight to her king-size bed with a huge light underneath. There was nothing under my mom's bed because she kept everything in bins at the foot of her bed and closet. The foot of my mother's bed was facing the door, while the head was against a wall next to 2 big windows. Then it was her closet across from where you were laying so you could see it. Then the bathroom was right next to that. Once I got under the bed, I saw that the light was still on. I looked through the cracks, and it was quiet. And then I saw about 6 sets of feet that were not human. Then I felt them start to surround me. One almost touched me by getting on the bed and reaching down through the crack. There were 2 through the crack, 3 in front, not showing their faces, but trying to reach further under. One was at the foot of the bed. Then I looked near me and saw a face that was gray and had huge eyes. I felt like I couldn't move, but when I looked closer, I saw a whole galaxy in its eyes. It was so pretty how the colors merged like a sunset, and for a second I almost forgot it was an eye. Then it moved or flinched and I came to my senses. I looked around and they were still moving to get me, while the one that I looked at was staying still and looking at the closet. Then I heard the closet door opened, and I saw Nega. Nega was my childhood imaginary friend that taught me the greater lessons than what is now being slowly forgotten. After seeing her, I relaxed and I saw them try to fight. And then the tall, gray-like humanoids were gone. I looked at Nega, and then I looked at the bathroom to see another creature that had orange eyes that I know commonly stays in my mother's bathroom. Nega hushed me, and then I seemed to have forgotten what had happened until I turned 14. After this, I just carried on with life. I never saw my imaginary friend again, but old friend still lingers from time to time in my memories. Six years ago, my boyfriend at the time, husband now, woke me up sweating and shaking in absolute fear. I asked him what was wrong, and he began stuttering and telling me that I would never believe him. He went on to tell me that he was woken up around midnight to this person standing at the end of the bed. Yes, my first thought was sleep paralysis as well. But he sat up and was ready to attack if he needed to. In his head, he heard a voice that wasn't him, telling him that it was okay and that they weren't there for any bad reasons. He said he felt immediately calm from that. He also noted that he was shocked with what a light sleeper I was and that his movements hadn't woken me. This being was unnaturally tall and had to crouch a little due to its height, and us having been asleep in the basement. He said that this being reached out for a greeting and again began hearing a voice in his head saying, "Hello." Nothing much else happened that night as my husband was frightened. All he remembered at the time was that the last thing he heard from it in his mind was, "I'll see you again soon." And then he said it felt as if time had started again, not realizing that it ever felt like it stopped until that point. And then he was back in reality, and that's when he woke me. What he thought had only been about a 10 to 15-minute encounter had actually taken over an hour. These visits continued for months, minimum once a week, max 3 to 4 times, but my husband got less and less frightened every time. This thing and him built a sort of friendship from what he explained to me. It had a name, but for the life of me, I can't remember what he said it was. It answered any and every question my husband had. I won't go into what those were here. But after a while, it just stopped. He stopped waking me up in the middle of the night, or telling me about it the next morning. But the times were always the same. He would be awoken around midnight, and they would have discussions about literally anything my husband was curious about. And then he would come back to reality and time would unfreeze again, between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m., having only felt like the encounter had lasted a short period of time. Once it stopped, though, I can't emphasize enough just how much it stopped. I mean, full stop. It was like for him it never happened. It's been 6 years, so I know this is choppy, but it's hard to remember everything with it having been so long ago now. I forgot about it for so long, and I don't know what prompted me to remember it just about a week ago. But now I just can't stop thinking about it, and the oddness of it all, and how it just stopped so suddenly. He's literally never made mention of it ever again, and I've never brought it up to him this last week in fear that he may think I'm crazy. Which I don't know why that's my fear, but part of me thinks if there's a chance he's completely forgotten it, whether it be on his own or something else, he may think I've gone insane. Anyway, if you have any ideas or similar stories, please let me know. I'm trying to figure this all out and what happened to my husband, as it's literally keeping me up at night. Growing up, my family seemed to have a knack for picking haunted houses or haunted locations. Being a military kid was part of that. We got sent to old parts of the bases that we lived in all the time. One was the entire section of houses, which was haunted by what the wives and my mom deduced was some kind of Civil War general. There was one base in particular that we lived on twice in my life. This was the second time, when I had studied more of the paranormal, and it was really interesting. It was a young house, one of the newer ones, which had been built in the span between when we had moved from and back to the base. My old childhood home was long gone, but my mom still thinks the general makes his rounds. This house had something else. Both my mom and I have a knack for telling if a house is haunted. To us, it won't feel empty. A haunting-free house feels more like a vacuum of space. I always get the sense that something will peek around the wall at me when I look through the windows if something's there. At the house we lived in, I would always get the sensation that something was standing behind me. Like in the horror movies, where you see the ghost behind the character, but then they stand up and it's gone. For fun, I called the ghost Johnny, as in Johnny Rebel, seeing as how it was Virginia and probably another Civil War ghost. One night, I was laying in bed, and I heard what sounded like pacing up in the attic area. It was frantic pacing, like someone was unhappy with something or panicked. The activity was ramping up a little, so my mom and I did a mini investigation. We opened up the attic door, and my mom stuck her head up there. Immediately, she called down to my dad, asking if he had put the Christmas decorations up there. He did, and we both shared a knowing look. She took the decorations down, and the activity immediately settled down. When my dad was promoted, we were moved to a new house just a short walk from the old one. My mom came to me one day and said that she had had a dream. In her dream, it was the dining room from the previous house, and a little boy was sitting at the table, dressed in 18th century clothing. She said he looked up and had blood coming from his eyes and mouth. She started yelling at him to leave. She said that he looked startled and said, But I don't want to leave. We both agreed it was an odd dream, and as I thought about it, I looked up yellow fever, knowing that it was a sickness prominent during that time frame that the boy looked to be a part of. I didn't think it would turn up what I found. Not only had there been a yellow fever epidemic in that area in the 1800s, but there were 2 stages of the disease. If you got the second stage, you would bleed from the eyes and mouth. I told this to my mom, and we came to the conclusion that Johnny was probably not a Civil War soldier, but a little boy who died of a terrible disease and just wanted his space to be left alone. So, call me crazy, and I'm sure some people will, that's okay. But I swear this happened to me when I was 16. What's weirder is that it happened on the same night that I had an alien abduction dream. My mom wasn't home. She worked nights looking after the elderly at a nearby retirement home. I lived a normal teenage night playing video games, messaging friends, and watching TV. I went to my room and went to sleep. I had an extremely intense nightmare that I was abducted by aliens. All I remembered is looking up in my dream and seeing my whole field of vision turn completely white, as I simultaneously heard this really loud buzzing or humming sound. I wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and it's around 5:30 in the morning. But what's weirder is that I'm not in my bed. Confused as heck, I look around the room, and to my surprise, I'm somehow in my mom's room, frozen in fear and confused. I tried to figure out what was going on. After about 20 to 30 minutes, I finally calmed myself down enough to get up. So I get up, and when I go downstairs, I can see through the door to our backyard, which is made of glass, and I can clearly see that the gate to our backyard is wide open. It's an old-fashioned wooden gate, and it hadn't been opened in years because it was covered in vines and was always left locked. I go to investigate, and as I go to unlock the back door, the door handle goes down with no resistance at all, and I realize, crap, this door is already unlocked, which only added to how shook up I was, to be honest. So, hesitantly, I go into the backyard anyway, and I look at the gate, which is also open. I look for footprints or boot marks, thinking that somebody must have kicked the gate open. Nothing. I look more closely. The old rusty lock to the gate, which hasn't been opened in years, is still there. Not bent, not damaged, not broken at all. Just a bit rusty, the same as it's always been. I lock that gate back up and look around the yard. Nothing's missing. I go back in the house. I lock the back door and take a real good look around, and nothing's missing. I go back to my bedroom and double check that I did get in my bed that night, and yep, I definitely did. The bed's still messy. I thought, did I sleepwalk? Did I go into the yard and then somehow go get in my mom's bed? I checked the carpet and floors in the house, which certainly would have been dirty and muddy if I had walked into the yard and then back in. And nothing. I called my mom and explained everything that had happened, and I asked if she had messed with the gate or unlocked it lately. She confirmed that she hadn't, and was just as surprised and confused as I was. To this day, I have no explanation as to what happened that night. Just to confirm, I was very into sports as a teenager. I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, I didn't take substances, and I was completely sober. I also remember feeling oddly terrified of the sky as it began to get dark out that evening. I remember sometimes that if I was playing football or soccer with friends after that, and it started getting dark, instead of walking home like I usually would, I'd kind of hustle. I'd constantly look up at the sky, feeling fear, and I remember a number of times where I decided to just run home instead because I was scared, even months later. All of this still confuses me, even to this day. This is my story of a dude I happened to come across in the deep woods in Florida. This was in Ocala National Forest. I probably came across either a poacher's camp or a drug operation, and they put signs up to scare people away. In any case, my friend and I were hunting and stayed out past midnight looking for hogs. We realized we were way deeper into the woods than we had planned on being, and we began to walk out. We were probably 3 or 4 miles into the woods, off the main road. We were walking in the dark, heavily armed with AR-15s, sidearms, and fixed-blade hunting knives in a hip sheath. So we really weren't afraid of anything. Plus, the moon was bright enough to navigate by, even under the trees. We had lights mounted on our rifles, and I had a large, powerful flashlight in my hand that I could make into a strobe or use as a club. The point is, we weren't paranoid of anything. We felt very prepared. We were heading back and we started to hear something hauling through the woods on our right. It was about to cross the trail in front of us. Most trails are old logging roads. They're pretty wide and they make square quadrants out of the forest. This particular trail cut across one of the quadrants and was overgrown and thin. We thought it was a deer or maybe a black bear. Either way, we couldn't shoot it at night. So instead of using the rifle lights, I used my handheld light. We waited until we heard it get near the trail, and then I turned my light on. All we saw was a pair of white legs cross the thin trail about 50 feet in front of us. They looked human. We were a little baffled. Like, what moron goes crashing through the deep woods at 1 a.m. in shorts, and through the thick brush, not the trail? Super weird. But again, and armed as we were for hogs, we pushed on because it would have taken like 30 minutes extra to turn back and go around the quadrant. We hear crashing now and then in the woods, but it never got close to us again. Finally, we reached my car, and I was relieved that it was still there and not broken into. We keep the rifles loaded, shove our handguns between the seat and the center console, and get into the front seat. I began to drive out of the forest with my moonroof open, and the stars were just gorgeous. It's easy to forget how amazing the night sky is in the middle of Ocala. About half a mile down the road, my headlights fall onto a man in a checkered button-down shirt and shorts, just walking along the road. We're miles from any paved road, and then it's another 5 to 10 miles on the paved road to get to a town. Also, this is in the northern part of the forest, where there are no old cabins that were built before it was declared a national park. This dude had no backpack or anything. Was this what we saw across the path? If so, what was he doing walking out here at 1:30 to 2 in the morning with no supplies, no flashlight, nothing? He didn't even look at us as we passed. Anyway, as we got near the paved road, we unloaded the rifles and put them in the trunk and went home. It was a really fun trip, and I can't wait to go back, but I will always be armed in Ocala. Something seriously weird is going on out there. So let me start by saying that my brother and I are extremely experienced desert campers, and we have lived near deserts pretty much our whole lives. I have never in my 20 years of life ever for 1 second believed in anything paranormal, or anything to do with evil spirits. Unlike my brother, who has always sensed presences and been able to see mostly what we call jinn, also known as demons. Last night, though, things changed for me, and it marks the last time that we'll be camping alone in the desert. We've always had the same place we like to go whenever we want to camp with minimal effort. Our day started as normal as ever. But as we got closer and closer to our destination, I saw my brother's mood completely shift. When I asked what was wrong, he just shrugged me off and told me to just keep driving. When we arrived, I felt completely fine, but my brother was still unusually quiet. It was around 1 p.m. at that point, and we were planning on leaving at about 12 to 1 in the morning. Because of the heat, we made the terrible decision to set up under a few trees and a source of water, which in the Middle Eastern culture where we live is where the jinns live at night. Not that I believed in that at the time, of course. However, we still set up our camp and continued on as normal. Now, my brother always says that when he feels a presence, or several in this case, he gets extremely unlucky. First, he almost dropped a box of coals on his foot. Then he spilled an entire bottle of Coke on his phone. Then he dropped it into the sand and proceeded to smash his elbow on the edge of the chair he was sitting on. His elbow is now very swollen. And last, but certainly not least, when he was looking through one of our boxes, he felt something cold and sharp right against his arm. He realized it was an unsheathed knife, which we packed with its case the previous night before. And later he said that it felt like something had pushed his hand into it, right where his veins are. All of these events consecutively occurred within a matter of a few hours, which made us both uneasy, and I, for the life of me, could not figure out why he was suddenly so unlucky. As I was starting to question his clumsiness, a random couple appeared out of nowhere, informing us that they were stuck in the sand and needed help. We drive a Land Cruiser and they had a Nissan Altima, so we didn't expect to encounter as many issues as we did. We first dug them out without any issues, but as we pushed them out of the sand, it got stuck again. If you know anything about dune bashing or desert camping, then you understand the physics behind how wheels get stuck in sand, and the way this Nissan was stuck was incredibly unusual. It was literally stuck somewhere with plenty of space available for grip, and later my brother said that as we were digging them out of the sand, that's when he really started to feel like an evil presence was around us. But he didn't want to say anything and ruin the trip and freak me out. We ended up having to tow them out of the sand, which again was much harder than it should have been. First, our tow strap broke off of their bumper. The tow strap cost $200 and was fine, but their bumper was slightly damaged. Then we almost got stuck ourselves in a 20-minute job that took more like 90, which again was extremely unusual, and with hindsight, just the beginning of all the crap to come. When we came back to our camp, we noticed how everything around us had gotten unusually quiet. The area we were in has hundreds of birds around, and as far as we have seen, 3 cats who sometimes pay us a visit. But there wasn't a single noise at all, other than our fire, which was dying out unusually quickly. It had gotten dark so fast that we had to scramble to build a fire to cook our dinner, before we were asked to help the couple. And I had noticed the silence, but it didn't bother me. My brother suddenly grabbed my hand as we were sitting down to eat, and said with clear fear in his voice that we should get going as quickly as possible, that he didn't feel safe. To ease both of our minds, we prayed. We are both Christian, so of course we thought it would help, but I think it accelerated everything that happened, and just made whatever was there angry. We quickly finished our dinner, and me being the skeptic, I was completely fine staying there. But I wanted to humor my brother. But that's when I started getting the nagging feeling that it was time to pack up and leave. It hit me like a wave, and I was quite taken aback by the feeling. So I voiced it to my brother, and he agreed that we should pack up right away and leave. We started packing up at a normal pace, like we were just tired and wanted to go. And that's when we heard a sound very close to us, on the opposite side of the pond, which wasn't that big, that I could only describe as the sound of death itself. It seemed to go on for several minutes, and when I say that we looked at each other in absolute fear, I genuinely mean it. I was about to have a heart attack right then and there. At that point, after being frozen for a few minutes, and quite reasonably so after hearing that bellowing screech so close to us, we turned on the car, drove it back so we could see better with the headlamps, and just started throwing everything into the car without much care, but with a whole lot of urgency. After the screaming, everything hit the fan. First, it was the sound of twigs snapping and footsteps all around us. Then it was the shadows behind the trees. I tried everything to get those shadows to change shape, walking around the trees and moving lights, but nothing. It looked like there were people just staring at us the whole time. You could really feel it too. We genuinely felt like we were not alone, and that we weren't with friendly entities either. We also noticed that all 3 cats were huddled right behind our car, away from the trees, so they were not the ones snapping the twigs. At that moment, I was really hoping they were going to move so I could get us out of there safely, and thankfully, when we slowly started to reverse, they took a hint. But they looked absolutely terrified, and were just staring at the trees too. It felt like whatever was there was getting closer. I've never felt anything like it. It was a gut feeling. It was just one of those natural instincts you can't ignore. Thankfully, we were able to pack up quickly. Our tent was very close to the trees though, so that was a nerve-wracking experience. And while we were packing, it was still very silent. It's very normal for the birds around that area to continue making sounds until 2 or 3 in the morning. And at this point it was about 8 p.m., so highly unusual. I personally think I was most terrified as I was driving back onto the main dirt path to leave the desert. I know cars very well. I know how they drive in the sand. And I know our car especially well because we've had it for so long. I could instantly tell that the steering was off and completely fighting against me. This fixed itself the second we were on the highway. The sounds of twigs snapping was still all around us, and it was loud enough to be heard over the sound of the car. On the path was what seemed like every bird in the area, just standing there and staring at us until we got close enough to force them to walk, not even fly, away. At one point, my brother just grabbed my shoulder and told me very sternly to just keep looking in front of me and under no circumstances to look through his window. It was the tone of voice that told me to listen to him for the love of God. We were in a part of the desert where we had to pretty much drive through the whole of the accessible areas to get onto the highway again, and there wasn't a single person around us. The only thing we saw was a very clearly abandoned Toyota, positioned behind a small dune and hidden by the trees, but was far enough from our campsite to easily rule out as the source of the original screech. The worst thing I saw as we were closing to the exit was that we saw in the middle of the path, staring directly at us, a deer. A deer. I have only seen 1 deer in 16 years of living here, and that was in someone's garden as a pet. It's safe to say that I was in complete shock. The deer was just not moving at all until I got close enough that we could practically smell the thing, before it slowly walked off the path while looking right at us. We quickly moved past the deer, and again my brother, with a grasp of my shoulder and a stern voice, said to keep my eyes right on the road. I asked him later as we got onto the highway what it was that he kept seeing, and he very reluctantly told me that he kept seeing large figures around us any time we went through a bend, and they were all either pointing right at us or ahead of us. I'm glad he didn't tell me at the time because I probably would have crapped myself. We still hadn't encountered anyone, but we still very clearly heard sounds all around us. And again, not the usual bird or cat, but big, unrelenting sounds. When I saw the exit, I was as happy as I have ever been. But that quickly faded when once again we saw another deer standing right in the middle of the road, slowly walking away and looking right at us. But this time, it didn't really look like a deer. It was more like a kangaroo mixed with a deer. And its eyes were milky. It looked rotten and horrible. I didn't much care. I just stepped on the gas, and fortunately it got out of the way in time. When you exit the desert, you can either turn right onto a long stretch of highway, or you can go left and go through a small town, then take the back streets to a parallel highway. As I was about to turn right, my brother once again, with that same tone of voice, said to go to the town. Later, he said once again that he saw a line of figures pointing ahead of us, so if we would have gone the other way, we probably wouldn't have made it home in one piece. Thankfully, as we made it farther and farther away and closer to our home, the gut feeling of being watched was going away. And of course, having never experienced something like this before, I was distraught and wanted to talk about it. My brother told me as we were going home that because we were alone, the jinn wanted to mess with us, that they wanted to scare us, and most likely cause us harm, and that the way they get you into such rural places is to force you to stop and then do whatever they want, which makes sense as to why there were so many animals blocking our path. He also said that they caused bad luck, and he could feel them the second we entered the desert, which explains his clumsiness all day, and the car that got stuck in such an unusual manner. Because he's my younger brother by 3 years, any time he had ever told me about this sort of thing before, I always just dismissed it as him scaring himself. I can excuse the sounds we heard and the shadows we saw last night. I can excuse the gut feeling as just being scared, but I cannot excuse the 2 deer we saw staring right at us, and I cannot excuse the car just randomly fighting against me as I was driving. The deer completely freaked me out, as did the tone of my brother's voice. It's safe to say we're not going camping there again. And it's also safe to say that I will never dismiss my brother when it comes to this kind of thing again. I'm so thankful to God that he was there and that we made it home safely. In order to really convey how scared I was when this happened, I'm gonna have to back up and give you a little context. For starters, I've told the whole story to maybe a handful of my closest friends, and the only family I've ever told is my twin sister. Even then, it only came up because they initiated conversations about similar topics regarding the paranormal. If I can help it, I'd rather not talk about it in real life. But here, on the wilds of the internet though, I guess I feel a little bit safer. It's also worth noting that I've included several instances that may or may not be related. Whether or not they truly are is a matter of personal speculation, but they are all paranormal nonetheless. If I had to pinpoint where it all began, I would say it was 2008, when I stayed home alone pretty much all summer. My sisters attended the Boys and Girls Club, and my parents worked all day. I was just a 13-year-old boy then, so staying home alone was pretty much the greatest thing I could think of. All I had on the agenda every day was eating junk food, playing video games, and doing whatever small chores I was assigned. Not a bad way to spend a summer. And it wasn't. For a few weeks, anyhow. When things started, though, they started small. Every couple of days, my mom would come home pissed off when she saw both of our dogs outside. We lived in North Alabama, so summer was hot and swampy. Because of that, we tended to keep the dogs inside until they needed to be let out to do their business, but it would never be any more than about 10 minutes. I loved those dogs, so I adhered to the 10-minute rule very strictly. It was also why I was so confused to see them outside on those days. I definitely did not let them out. Sure, I can be forgetful sometimes. Maybe 1 or 2 of those times I really did just have a brain fart. but I was 100% sure that most of those times I never let those dogs out. When I told that to my mom, she looked kind of concerned. Then I started hearing things. With freshly installed hardwood floors, I was familiar with the sound of them settling when the AC kicked on. It would be 1 or 2 popping sounds, then it would stop, until the AC turned off again. Rinse and repeat. Nothing crazy about that. One day, while I was binge playing old Nintendo games, I heard the boards settling again. But this time it wasn't because of the AC. And instead of 1 or 2 pops, there were several dozen, moving around. They went up and down the hallway, like somebody was pacing around. I paused my game and I listened to them. Thinking maybe my mom or my stepdad were back early from work, I went out to see them, and make sure the dogs were back inside so I wouldn't get chewed out again. But nobody was home. I shrugged it off as the floorboards just being particularly active that day, and I went back to playing my game once more. About an hour passed before the sounds repeated. The same quiet little footsteps. I paused my game again, and I listened harder this time. Another sound surfaced on top of the steps. It was kind of like trying to hear somebody else's phone call from across the room. You know there's a conversation going on, but you can't quite make out what it's about. I went to look again, this time going all the way across the house and into my parents' room. Still nobody. Then I thought, well, maybe the conversation was coming from outside in the neighborhood. I brought the dogs out back with me, and they went and did their business while I waited on the porch. From what I could tell, it was just another stiff, silent summer day. This particular thing happened a few more times, and it always made me feel really uneasy. It was even worse when I told my mom about it. She replied, "Oh good, you hear it too." Then she went on to tell me not to tell my stepdad, because he was very religious and for some reason didn't believe in any of this stuff. Things settled down after summer was over, and they stayed that way for a while. I had school to keep me occupied, and other than a few small instances, we had 2 quiet years. 2010 was the year things picked up a lot more. While my twin and my girlfriend at the time were hanging out in her room, they started messing around, taking dumb pictures with digital cameras. Now, my twin's room was the coldest in the house, and nobody could ever figure out why. It also used to belong to my older sister. Both times either of them moved into the room, their demeanor would change over the course of a few months. Where my older sister became more manic, throwing tantrums with growing frequency, my twin was starting to get depressed, sleeping all the time and always being fairly disconnected. While all 3 women in the house suffered from manic depression, bipolar disorder, and sometimes both, there was a very noticeable difference when my sisters occupied the room. And that digital camera my twin was playing around with, there was a picture on it that we didn't find for weeks after the fact that showed my girlfriend at the time and a really weird, smoky, veil-like presence in the room with them. Neither of them smoked, and the room never smelled like anything, so we weren't allowed to have candles in our room either. I'm still kicking myself for not saving that photo somewhere, because I think it might have been a good piece of evidence. On top of the apparition caught on my camera, my mother told me of an instance where footsteps walked from the kitchen and into the study where she worked on some stuff for her job. When the steps entered the room, she heard a voice whisper, "Ouch," very clearly into her ear. The next few experiences were things only I witnessed. They are, by and large, the more extreme parts of what I now guess to be a haunting, and they started in the summer of the same year, with my first episode of sleep paralysis. I had known about the phenomenon before it happened to me. My mom was a sufferer of frequent night terrors and the occasional paralysis. I also had a friend with narcolepsy that told me about it at school. The first time it happened to me, I wasn't too unsettled. It was on a weekend, and I drifted off watching Netflix. The next thing I knew, I was wide awake, and a few episodes of the show had gone by. I reached for a bottle of water by my bed, but I found that I couldn't move at all. It was strange and almost calm. I just kind of accepted what was happening, and I let it run its course. It eventually did. I got up, had a drink of water, went to the bathroom, and then went back to bed. A few days after the paralysis, things started moving around on their own. Another day spent home alone, I was once again playing video games and avoiding any responsibilities. As I had tried giving up soda that year, I almost always had a cup on my desk, filled either with orange juice or empty. There was rarely an in-between. This cup, however, just fell over in front of my eyes. There was no slant on the desk or anything like that. Nothing other than the cup was on it. It just tipped over, like someone had smacked it over. While I thought it was odd, I set it back upright and went on with my gaming. I had settled that it was some kind of trick of gravity, which in hindsight sounds way more ridiculous than a poltergeist. This was immediately followed by the sound of a bird hitting my window, my light bulb exploding overhead, and the cup once again tipping over. Unable to rationalize it this time, I scrambled out of my room and into the kitchen, where my stepdad was eating. As I said earlier, my mom asked me not to talk to him about anything paranormal, but I was pretty shook up by what I had just seen. He asked me if I was all right. I told him that a bird had flown into my window and kind of scared the crap out of me, to which he laughed. I didn't sleep very well that night. The last and most extreme incident I had at that house happened just about a week later. My second episode of sleep paralysis. It was a Sunday morning, and I could hear my family moving about the house to get ready. It didn't take me long to prepare myself, so I tended to sleep in an extra 15 minutes. As I fell back to sleep, a familiar feeling came over me. Unable to speak, I couldn't call for help. A weight on my chest made it difficult to breathe. I was incapable of moving. Thinking it would pass like last time, I just waited. It became evident very quickly that this was not going to be like last time. What little daylight there was coming in through the curtains turned blood red. Instead of the calm I had during the first episode, I grew very unsettled. It was dark now, and the room looked like one of those photo development rooms in terms of color. My door opened on its own. A figure stood there, just looked like a silhouette, all dark and shrouded. It wore what appeared to be a robe made of thick fur, and kept its hood drawn over. Even though my room was normally comfortable, I felt the temperature drop. I could see my own breath, and the breath of this figure. It just kept staring at me. Something about it felt evil, like it was waiting to do something awful to me. I tried to yell and make it go away. I even attempted to invoke the name of Christ, but I couldn't speak or breathe enough to do so. The blood red changed to pitch black. The figure disappeared into it, but a pair of dark red eyes pierced through me from where it stood. I then saw two numbers sort of fly at me, 13 and 3. That's when the paralysis ended. I got up and I went to church. I've since lost my faith and I'm no longer religious. Just what I saw that morning is still a mystery to me. But I did follow up on those two numbers that same morning in church. Psalm chapter 13, verse 3 reads in the King James Version, quote, "Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Lighten my eyes lest I sleep the sleep of death." Needless to say, I got chills, and I still do every time I tell the story. This happened in mine and my husband's first house, several months after our oldest son was born. We had lived in the house for almost 4 years before he was born, but had never experienced anything like this before. It's actually the only time I've ever experienced something that I would consider to be paranormal. My husband claims his grandma's home was haunted growing up. Either way, This experience shook the both of us in a whole new way. We had finally decided to move our son into his nursery. For the first 6 to 7 months, he had slept in our room in his own bassinet, but we decided it was time to get him adjusted to his crib and his room. So we gathered the strength and made it happen. We had dug out the baby monitor that my mom had gotten us months prior to set up security, if you will. Granted, this was 1997, so they weren't anything fancy, but enough to help us feel better about our choice to move our son into his room. In addition to the baby monitors, we had put up one of those moving night lights in his room, the ones where the lampshade would project the pictures onto the wall, moving ever so slowly. This one was made up of friendly sea creatures, and our son loved it. The first night that we actually slept separately from our son, we both woke up at the same time. My husband looked at me, and I looked at him, and then we listened to the monitor for a minute, but it was quiet. It didn't appear that our son had woken us up. So, what had happened? I almost just went back to sleep, calling it jitters. But my husband sort of grabbed my arm, not hard, but firm, and he whispered, "What the hell?" while looking straight ahead. Following his gaze, I could see that each of the 4 drawers to our dresser were pulled open. I turned on the light and we both hopped out of bed. It was around 2 a.m., and we weren't sure what was going on, so we didn't speak with our mouths, just with our eyes. My husband grabbed his military knife and motioned for me to follow him. I did, and he handed me another, smaller knife, which I held tightly, continuing to follow him, me against the wall, him in front of me, walking toward the baby's room, and leaving no blind spots as we did. When we got to the room, my husband opened the door swiftly and with force, but quietly. It was just our son, fast asleep. No one else. My husband tells me to stay with the baby while he checks the house. I ask him to please call 911, and he tells me that he will as soon as he gets downstairs. He tells me he's going to shut the door, so when he does, I set the knife down, pick up my son, and sit. I was just rocking him, back and forth, staring off at the fun sea creatures dancing all over the walls. It was comforting. After sitting or rocking for a while, I started to feel a bit warmer. Not like a fever, but best described as how it feels when somebody sits really close to you. You can feel their body heat. While feeling this, I'm looking down at my son, debating if he looks or feels warm, but he looks comfortable, still sleeping ever so soundly. Suddenly, a mitten on my son's left hand flies off in a way that it might if someone had ripped it off of him hastily. He wasn't moving his hands, and this hadn't woken him up, but it certainly got me up. I was now standing, breathing a bit heavier, and wondering where the heck my husband was. Moments later, my husband opens the door. It scared me at first. I just really wanted the sound of footsteps approaching to be his footsteps. When they were indeed, I was so relieved, and I hugged him, and I told him rapidly that we had to get out of this room. He wasn't whispering any longer, telling me, "Okay, let's go back to our room, or even downstairs." He started to shuffle us out, saying the police were going to send someone by. He said he checked everywhere in the house. No one could possibly be inside. He seemed to feel better, but I was still afraid. We made our way to the family room, which was on the first floor, center of the house, really. You could see the whole area from the top of the stairs, and from 2 of the bedroom doorways, our room and the baby's room. From where I was sitting, I could see the nightlight reflecting off my son's walls, so I watched them again. This time, I was wary of the room, though. I couldn't help but wonder what the heck I had actually experienced up there, but I just tried to keep my cool while waiting for the police. My husband asked me what I was staring at. I said, "Our son's room." Then I told him what I had felt in there. At first he sort of smiled, but then in all sincerity he said, "Maybe it's a ghost." I said, "Excuse me?" He didn't elaborate. Probably because of the loud knock on the front door. The police were here now, waiting for one of us to let them in. Long story short, there was no guy, no person, no nothing. At least not in our house, and not the surrounding area the officers had checked. It was a quiet night in our town. I wasn't having it though, at least not that night. I told my husband we should go get a hotel, have our parents and such search the place again tomorrow. He said he would stay at the house, but that he would send my son and I to his mom's house. By the next night, maybe it was even 2 nights that had passed, my husband had convinced me to come home. We were on the phone, and he told me that the home was fine. He had decided that we had just overreacted. For a bit, I guess I agreed with him. When he picked us up from his mom's house later that day, I asked him what he thought about the mitten incident, the one that flew off our son's hand. He just smiled again, and I asked what he was smiling about. He just thought I had nothing to worry about. He said, "Think of it like a guardian angel or something. No harm has come of this thing, right?" I told him he couldn't be serious, that if he thought our house was haunted, we should go, now, back to his mom's. Then we somehow just sort of found a way to laugh it all off. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I was very excited to sleep in our bed, happy to be home, and I actually felt sort of silly for making such a fuss. My husband put our son down in his room, and then joined me on the couch with the baby monitor. I remember laying there sort of nodding off as we watched some late-night TV. Above the TV are the 2 bedroom doors. My peripherals are on my son's bedroom doorway, but I'm only keeping it there in the event something about it changes. I was nodding in and out for a bit, before I'm wide awake, sitting straight up. My husband says something like, "Whoa, what's wrong?" But I just turn his head to the upstairs, and he sees the same thing that I am. The fun sea creature light is spinning, rapidly, or at least it's projecting as though it is. I tell my husband to go turn it off. Just as I do, we hear the sound of something falling. We know it came from our son's room, because we heard it externally, but also through the baby monitor. He hopped up and ran upstairs. He heads into the room and he's gone for a minute. When he comes back out, the baby is in his arms and also the diaper bag. He calmly asks me to grab our bags, which were still by the door, and to follow him to the car. We get settled, and he tells me that he's running in just to grab some of his overnight stuff and to lock the doors. Then he's gone. So I do. I lock the doors and turn the headlights on, just wanting to illuminate all of that darkness. My husband dashes outside. He's got a handful of stuff, and without a word, he buckles in and starts to back out of the driveway. We start heading back toward his mom's house. I hadn't even asked what had happened up to this point, but about 5 minutes in, I had to know. He was checking to see if the baby was asleep, as though he could actually understand what we were about to talk about. It was sweet, but also a little unsettling, because he, my not scared of anything husband, was terrified. He said, "We're gonna stay with Mom for a minute, and then figure the rest out. Maybe sell the damn place, it's too small anyway." Sell the house? He just looked uncomfortable, trying to get more out of him, but having a hard time with it. He finally said, "It opened up his drawers. When I went up there, the light was going nuts, and his drawers, they were wide open. We can't stay there." And so we didn't. Sure, we got our stuff, but we never stayed there, and we didn't bring our son there anymore. In the end, we had the place blessed, handed over the keys, and haven't really looked back, other than to talk about remember when, which isn't exactly frequent. Basically, I don't miss that house. Not even a little bit. In November of 2017, I was in the end stages of my pregnancy. Our apartment was heated by a gas fireplace, and, stupidly, the carbon monoxide detector was in an adjacent room with the door closed. It wasn't until the door opened that my husband and I were aware that I was slowly being poisoned. I was sent to the hospital. While on oxygen, I went into labor, and thus began a very horrible ordeal. I could elaborate, but I'm skipping it for now. Anyway, 3 things happened. Number 1, my daughter was born. Number 2, something latched onto me while I was in the ER for the poisoning. And number 3, my husband took a job out of state to support us while getting his career going. Week 1 after leaving the hospital. The whole time I'm in the maternity wing, I'm having issues sleeping. Insomnia is common for me, so I didn't think of it too much. However, every time I started to sleep, I would wake up from a panic attack. This went on for the week that I was there, and about a week after coming home. Eventually, I was able to start sleeping, but then things started to happen. I lived in the apartment for 3 years prior with no incidents, but onwards of week 2 coming home from the hospital, a lot of things started happening. I kept a journal, and I've written it out here. So this is exactly what happened and how I felt about it at the time. November 22nd, 2017. Whispering coming from the audio baby monitor. This is a common occurrence from this point forward. December 8th. First unusual cold spot. Living room was always about 20 degrees warmer than the rest of the apartment, but suddenly it was freezing in one spot of the room. Never cold there again. December 11th. The Babymobile's batteries drained rapidly. This also became common. First set of batteries last a month. All following batteries died within 72 hours. Was eventually moved to my mother's house, where the mobile operated as intended. January 3rd, 2018. Never felt comfortable being alone in the house. Felt cold no matter where I was. Started living in my mother's house to avoid being in my apartment. February 17th. Mother's landlord threatens to up my mother's rent if I don't leave. I return home. Was greeted with a horrible stench, and was forced to clean my whole house top to bottom to get rid of it. Daughter begins to scream in her sleep. This occurs about once a week. I can't wake her, but she's screaming. Doctors find nothing wrong. April 1st, husband returns home. Everything stops happening. I feel like I'm crazy because no one has witnessed this but me. He gets a job at home. Everything seems fine. We live happily. August 6th. While outside on the balcony, the door handle that I had just used with no problem breaks, trapping me outside. While trying to climb down from the 2nd floor, I fall, break my back, and end up hospitalized. My aunt moves in to help with my daughter while I recover. Months later, my aunt confesses from day 1 of being there that she felt like somebody was watching her and was often cold. I was drugged up for 2 months while recovering, so I don't have much to say. October 27th. We decide to move my daughter into her own bedroom before her birthday. We had the baby monitor, a blanket, and a bag sitting on the coffee table when we all stepped outside, my husband, my aunt, my daughter, and I, to see our friend in the parking lot. When we returned, the baby monitor was sitting on the floor, 3 feet away in an upright position. This is when my husband believed me about what I'd said while he was gone, and my aunt confesses her issues listed above. October 29th. A doll that had been sitting on a shelf in my daughter's room is sitting upright in the middle of the living room the next morning. My daughter could not reach it, nor leave her crib. My aunt was sleeping on the couch and heard nobody in the night. November 2018 to July 2019. I'm grouping this together because there's too much stuff in the journal, but basically, the house went haywire. I have several days where multiple entries occur. Thumping, lights flickering, bad odors, cold spots, toys turning on by themselves, objects moving, whispering. and my daughter develops nightmares on an almost nightly basis. March 9th. Our friend W comes to visit. In a very disturbing way to greet her, the word hello is written on the bathroom mirror from a marker that originated from a separate room. This isn't her first dealings with hauntings, so she replies with, "Hello, who are you?" Later, it replied with, "Rick." June 14th. Our friend L asks to use our apartment to host a party for some MLM she was a part of. 30-plus people show up throughout the night. One, who has never set foot in our apartment prior, commented that the bathroom light kept turning on and off the whole night, even when no one was in there. June 29th. My mother and her boyfriend come to visit. Everyone was drinking and goofing off. Suddenly, the boyfriend demands to go home and leaves without explanation. Later, my mother informs me that he saw a black mass floating around the ceiling, hovering around me, and moving like it was pulling something out of me. He convinces my mom to have a cleansing done. July 1st, evening. My mother, with the aid of her boyfriend and guidance from his friend, performed a cleansing, drawing everything out of the main door. My daughter screamed the whole time this was happening, but immediately fell asleep once it was done. The house felt still, like frozen in time until sunrise. July 2nd, morning. A black handprint was found on the roof of the outside stairs. I lived in a multi-family home, and the stairs to the second floor were outside because the second floor is a separate apartment. From then on, we didn't have anything else happen. We moved out in June of 2020. 2 months after, my daughter asked me why we no longer lived in the old house. I told her why, and that we weren't moving back there. She replied with, "Good. Mr. Black was scary. He wanted to eat my face." I've been dying to get this story off my chest for years to people who don't think I'm crazy, as it's rather maddening. Before I begin, I don't believe in things like Bigfoot, werewolves, ghosts, supernatural or paranormal stuff in general, but that doesn't mean that I'm able to explain what happened this night. This was a long time ago. I was a teenager. My parents were not very strict, so I had a lot of freedom. I had 2 friends, and they had their own friends as well. And one of my friends' parents owned this huge part of a forest. My friends, their friends, and I went deep into the woods with a bunch of supplies, and we started making our own treehouse and forts. It was a big part of my childhood, building stuff with my friends, and this place became our sanctuary for a long time, where we'd spend a lot of our time away from the adults. This event happened years after we built the place initially, and also after we rebuilt it because one time it got destroyed. But that's another interesting story for a different time. This is the backstory for all of the events that I'm about to recall. One friend and I spent the night at our sanctuary that we had built, which none of us have ever done before. We only hung out there and then went home. We all planned to spend the night together because it would be fun. Most of our friends weren't allowed to spend the night there, though, because of parents and other things, and one chickened out because he was afraid. So it ended up just being me and one other person, my close friend's cousin. We weren't really close at the time, and we fought a lot, but surprisingly we got along well that night. We spent most of the day swinging from trees, climbing them and hanging out on this tire rope swing while talking. It was a normal day. And then we laid down for rest at about 9 p.m. About 10 minutes after laying down in bed in our sleeping bags, talking to each other under our makeshift tents, we heard rustling. I sat up and saw a very tall silhouette of something that looked to be like a human but was transparent. I could see right through it. I squinted and froze, and it very quickly climbed this tall tree and as I was looking at it, it disappeared. I was in complete disbelief and shock. I had no idea what I had just seen, if I had seen it at all or if I had hallucinated. I wasn't scared in the moment, just perplexed. Being young and worried, though, I said to my friend that we should leave, and not wanting it to hear me, I got close to his ear and just said, "There's something in the woods looking at us." After I said that, I saw his facial expression turn to fear, so we got up and started walking down the path out of the woods, calmly. I didn't want to sprint because it might chase, and I also wasn't even sure I'd seen anything. I just didn't want to take any chances. Very shortly after we left, we both got this weird feeling of déjà vu and confusion, like we'd been hit with hard drugs or something, except we don't do drugs, and we had only eaten food that we brought from our house. There are also no hallucinogenic plants in our part of the country. Nothing like that. Everything was so slow, and I felt disoriented. But we continued to walk in this direction for quite a while, stumbling in the darkness because of our mental state. I realized that we should have been out of the forest by now. I knew that this was the way out, 110%, because I'd been going in and out of this place for years, even in the dark. Yet I didn't recognize all the trees around us, just the path. It was like our surroundings were changing. My friend randomly yells, "Yeah, I'm coming," as I'm looking in the opposite direction from him. I turned around, very confused, and asked him why he said that. He said that his mom was calling his name to help lead him out of the forest. I heard nothing. I told him that I didn't hear anything, and he looked at me like I was insane and walked off the path and into the forest. I grabbed his arm and pulled him back because I didn't want him to get lost. That's when my friend sees the transparent thing that I saw earlier, sitting perched on a tree branch in the direction that his mom was calling him from. He points it out to me. Its transparency is almost like a heat wave effect. We stared at it for 10 seconds in total disbelief. It looked like a transparent being, but we were trying to discern if it was something else, and we were just imagining it being alive, because there was no movement. But then, it hunched down like it was trying to stalk or be stealthy, and very quickly, it climbed up a tree a little more, and then went to the next one, and then the next one, getting closer to us. We can't hear it at all. It's completely silent, and its silence was exacerbated by the fact that all the other creatures had also gone completely silent, and it was only in that moment that I had really started to realize that. Not a single bug or animal had made a sound since we started leaving camp. This is when our curiosity turned into fear, and once again, we began to see it move. Once it got above us, though, the only thing we could hear was the crunching of the branch as its weight was put down on it. Every little sound that was made was so distinct because it was so quiet and remote. We couldn't see anything because the tops of the trees are so dark. We actually started running, terrified, not worrying about being calm anymore. We heard noises in the trees above us, and finally it faded away ahead of us, as if it had gone ahead. But the sound was a lot quieter than if a normal animal had been running through the treetops. It sounded as if this thing was very light, but it wasn't very small, so that made no sense. We still kept running forward, despite it sounding like it had gone ahead, and we ended up back at the place that we started. Many, many minutes of walking, and we were back at this place after running for like 20 seconds. It was impossible. But instead of staying on the ground, we climbed to the top of the treehouse with our items as quickly as possible and closed the door, wedging a small piece of plywood on it to keep it shut. We heard something climbing up, and extremely odd noises as well, almost like the mimicking noises of rain and wind, but there was no water seeping into our treehouse, and there would have been had it been raining, and it wasn't wet. This persisted for about a minute, and then we didn't hear from it again. I'm pretty sure at that point it had left, but we spent the rest of the night there until the sun came up anyway, just in case. When he checked his iPod Touch for the first time, right after we closed the door, It was 5 a.m. We started laying on the ground at 9 p.m. 8 hours had passed in what felt to us like no more than 40 minutes of time. Hours after we could start to see the sun through the treehouse slats, we went home. I no longer talked to this friend, but after this incident we discussed it, and we told everything from both of our points of view, and it all jived. We randomly brought it up to each other every few months and relived it, making sure that we were still on the same page about what happened and that we both remembered. I never spent the night out there again, and I didn't really even let myself stay out there past 5 p.m. for a very long time. I will never forget this Wednesday night as long as I live. It was the summer before 7th grade, sometime in July. It was Wednesday night, early Thursday morning. The evening before, my family had watched the old school show Unsolved Mysteries. I awoke in the night, lying on my right side, awake, but my eyes still shut, completely silent. None of us ran fans back then to aid in sleep. I was awake and basically waiting to fall back asleep again. However, I decided to open my eyes. On the right side of my bed, right there, was a being, seemingly fixated on a plush bear that I kept in bed with me. And this being fit all of the descriptions that I've always heard or watched on television of an alien. Shorter, pale gray skin, and those awful eyes, huge, black, and slanted, staring at my bear, right by my bed. Honestly, I cannot put into words how I felt right at that moment. I was only just about 12. At some point, I pulled my covers over my head and felt an awful rushing through my body of super warm, then cool, then warm again. Only later in my life did I understand that I was most likely feeling shock. I couldn't scream. I felt frozen. Too scared to scream, maybe. What if I did scream? My mother and stepfather and 2 brothers would hear me. What the heck would they do if they came running into my room and saw this thing? What would it do? Is it going to kill me? Abduct me? What if it already had and it was returning me? All of these thoughts plus a million more just raced through my young mind. It's awful just recounting it all. Again, how could I ever forget something traumatic like this? So, being such a brave 11-year-old, and after what felt like 12 hours, I decided to try and scare it. I decided that I would thrash my legs up and down from under my covers as hard as I could. I know, horrifying, right? I was so petrified, though. So I did this, and then remained under my covers, just waiting. Nothing happened. So I stayed under the covers. This had to be at least close to going on 2 hours from when I first opened my eyes and saw this thing. As I lay wide awake, I heard a noise. To this day, I still can't explain exactly how it sounded. The sound felt as if it surrounded me and was coming from outside. It was crisp, clean sounding, maybe mechanical, but maybe not, lasting only about 2 seconds. A sound that I had definitely never heard before, and have never heard since. As soon as I heard the sound, something in my mind told me, oh, they're gone. As crazy as it sounds, I firmly believed that the sound was their transportation leaving. Needless to say, I didn't sleep the rest of the night or early morning. It took me so long to confide in my family about this terribly scary incident. Of course, they did not believe me. However, now, from time to time, My mother will mention it and suggest that maybe that's why I suffer from insomnia now. Very well could be. This is the first time that I've shared this story publicly, though, and it would be reassuring to hear any other stories of similar happenings. This isn't my story, but it is my parents and two incredibly close family friends who told it. Before I was born, the four of them used to hang out a lot. They would often drive far out into the Mojave Desert, just to party and to drink around a fire and have a good time. For this story, I'm going to call my dad Conrad and my mom Stacy. Their friends I'll call Brad and Gina. So they drive all the way out into the desert and have a fire. It's summertime and it's hot. Although it's the middle of the night, it's still warm. My mom, Stacy, and her friend Gina were starting to get scared about tarantulas and decided that they didn't want to camp out there after all. So all four of them started driving back. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and they were on a dirt road that went for miles and miles with nothing on it. Suddenly, up ahead in the headlights, they saw the silhouette of a man in a long black trench coat with a wide-brimmed hat. The collar of his coat was pulled up. He was walking alongside the road, going the same direction that they were driving. My dad grew up hitchhiking a lot, and he used to pick up hitchhikers as well. So my mom knew that my dad would consider stopping and talking to this guy to see if he needed a ride. But they got this terrible feeling about him. My mom always said that just in the way he was walking, the way he looked and how he was dressed, and how he was just out there in the middle of nowhere with nothing, he just emitted this really messed up energy that felt absolutely terrifying and even evil. Gina felt the same way. My dad starts joking, "Hey, let's pick this guy up." And my mom and Gina immediately start screaming and crying and begging him not to. They were in the back seat. My dad was driving and Brad was in the passenger seat. Gina was even kind of punching my dad in the back, screaming, "No, don't stop, don't stop." I guess my dad slowed way down as he passed them, though, and they all turned to look at him as they went by. But the moment that they passed him, he was gone. He disappeared into thin air. It's not like there were rocks or trees or anything to hide behind. The weird thing is, I grew up hearing this story from my parents, but living far away from their friends. When I was very young, we moved up north, and they lost touch. Although whenever we would come back to California to visit, we'd always get together with them, and it was like nothing had changed. I moved back to California as an adult, and I work for Gina now. One of our first conversations when I came back was about the Hat Man. She brought it up, not me. And word for word almost, it was the exact same story that my parents had always told me growing up. To be honest, I've always secretly feared, yet been very intrigued by this entity because of their story, and then so many more stories that I have now read online. I couldn't believe it was such a big phenomenon when I first found it on the internet, because I was growing up just hearing my parents' story, long before the internet even existed. To this day, he fascinates and terrifies me. Our next tale comes to us from Reddit user ThrowingAway1999. The author recounts a horrifying experience from a road trip they went on with their mom. Here's what they wrote. I'll do my best to explain what I saw, but it's difficult to paint an exact picture. I was driving across the country with my mom. We had just entered California from Arizona a little before 11 p.m. It was a rural area, and there were other cars around, but I definitely wouldn't call it traffic. I'm driving, and a bit off the road, on the right side, at ground level, I see something glowing. It's a fluorescent, neon, but dark blue, very bright, but it didn't light up anything around it. It was just glowing. It was shaped like some kind of energy cell-looking thing out of a futuristic movie or video game, probably 5 feet tall and 2 feet wide, with ribbed sides. I then realized that this thing was moving, and moving very weirdly. It was moving like it was glued to the ground and tracing the slightly hilly terrain, like it was on top of some kind of off-roading vehicle that was magnetically held down to the terrain that it was driving on. After a few seconds, it goes up a little, and then it disappears into the ground. Then we see these 2 small spotlights pointing from the air down to where it disappeared. They were moving really quickly, like the ones that you see when there's some kind of event in an arena in your city. But the light didn't reach up super far. These spotlights were encased by some kind of light dome and couldn't shine past it. The light was just stopped in its tracks instead of fading out into the sky. The dome was all lit up. It looked like there was fog inside of it, but not exactly fog. I could still see these 2 spotlights shining around in it. Sporadically, because they were shining brighter than the rest of the dome. Keep in mind that I could not see anything else as it was really dark. I couldn't see the ground or the surroundings. I drove past it, speaking with my mom, trying to figure out what the heck we had just seen. All of it looked so extremely unnatural. Literally 5 seconds of driving later, my mom screams, "What's that?" I never ended up seeing what she was talking about, but she described basically what the internet says are stickmen on the left side of the road. It was the opposite side of the road from where we'd seen the neon light dome thing, and about 5 seconds of doing about 65 miles per hour as far as distance from the dome. She said they were about 12 feet tall, built like stick figures or on stilts, and she couldn't discern a head. I saw another post somewhere that described how they walked in the same way my mom had said, like lolloping or had kind of a bounce or waddle in their steps. At first, there was only one walking. Then another appeared close to it, and they were going toward each other. I punched the gas and got out of there because screw that. I didn't think quick enough to take a video of the light dome blue thing, but I'm glad I didn't, because for some reason, I feel like we wouldn't have gotten off that easy for having footage like that. I'm not sure why I can't shake the theory that this blue light has to do with the government or something, but I don't know anything. I'll also mention that we saw flashing things in the sky pretty far away, moving too close to each other to be a normal aircraft. I've written that off as Border Patrol drones, but mostly just to put myself at ease. This happened when I was around 9 or 10. I was staying the night at my friend Catherine's for the first time. We met the summer before, and we'd been inseparable ever since. Kat lived in this old 2-story house, surrounded by woods and dirt road. The house itself gave me an uneasy feeling when I first saw it. The shutters were falling off. The paint on the house seemed to be fading. It was an old piece of crap now that I think about it, but at the time, I was excited. I remember walking in after staring at the house for what seemed like 20 minutes. Surprisingly, the inside was a lot nicer than the outside, so I pushed that uneasy feeling down and just shrugged it off as nerves. I remember the smell of the house. I can't pinpoint it, but it was different, like walking into a musty room. I started to walk around, just to explore my surroundings, but I noticed Kat's mom watching me. I simply smiled and waved, but she just stood there, staring at me, wide-eyed. I had never met her before, but why was she staring at me like that? Suddenly, Kat flew around the corner and tackled me. We both fell and started to giggle. I noticed Kat's mom out of the corner of my eye start to turn around and walk off, and she was gone. Fast forward a couple of hours. Kat and I are laying on a beanbag in her room watching Children of the Corn, which, by the way, was one of my favorite movies at the time. I grew up watching horror movies, mostly Stephen King or any movie that my mom was watching at the time. Not her decision, but mine, because I love the feeling that a good horror movie gives you. She felt the same way, and that's why we clicked so much. Anyway, we were sitting here watching this movie, and suddenly the door opposite us slams closed. We both jumped and giggled and brushed it off because, well, we were kids. Until the second time, when it creaked open and slammed again, not seconds after the first time. Now I'm sitting there staring at this door, trying to figure out how in the world it's opening and closing by itself. In the midst of all that, the only other person in this house is Kat's mom, which I figured out earlier in the day was also just a tad creepy. "Do you think it's just your mom?" I asked, but she just shook her head. "Are you sure?" I asked again, but this time she said something that gave me the chills, and still does. She said, "My mom isn't home. It's just me and you, silly." I just stared at her, trying to wrap my head around what she had just said. Who leaves their 9-year-old home alone with a friend in a 2-story house? "Where's your mom?" I asked her. "She's at work." I giggled, thinking that she was just trying to trick me. "No, she's at work. She only works for a couple of hours, so she leaves me here because she trusts me." At this point, I'm just looking at her, and she noticed this look of worry on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked. I said, "If your mom is at work, then who was that lady staring at me earlier?" As I said this, we heard what seemed like footsteps at the time, but thinking about it now, it sounded more like shuffling in one spot, above us. I'm completely scared at this point. Every hair on my neck is standing on end, and I just want to leave. I start to get up when Kat pulled me back down and asked me if I heard that noise. I nodded. It was silent again, until the footsteps were back, but louder and faster. We both stared up at the ceiling, and she grabbed my hand. "This happens every day," she whispered. I looked over at her, and I could see true fear on her face. The footsteps stopped, and she looked at me, her face flushed white. "Is there an attic?" I asked. She pointed up toward the ceiling. "Well, maybe it's just squirrels or birds," I kept thinking, over and over. You ever notice when you're really quiet, that's when you can hear almost everything around you? Imagine if you're sitting in a house with your best friend alone at 10 years old, and you hear the giggle of a 3-year-old child. Mind you, she has no siblings. We were completely alone. Kat was just as scared as I was. I remember thinking that I just wanted to get out of this house. I grabbed her and ran out the door. At least we would feel safer and less scared outside the house than we would in it. "Want to hear a story?" Kat asked, pulling my mind back into reality. I nodded. "Well, this house used to be a daycare. There was this lady that would watch the kids, and one day she just locked them all in the attic. And then She hung herself from a rope in the kitchen. They all died because the kids were hungry and thirsty, and no one found them for months afterwards, in this house. My heart started to pound, my eyes wide with fear, and I just looked at her. "It's true," she said. "I've seen them, the little kids, every day. But I've never seen the lady. But you have, earlier." After she told me this, I don't remember much else except running out the door of her room and making it outside. Kat followed, begging me to stay, but I just had to get out. My stomach felt like knots. I felt as though I had walked into a horror movie, and I just wished the day had never happened. Fast forward years later, that was the last day I had ever seen or heard from Kat. I remember her always coming to play outside at my dad's during the day. I remember what she looked like. I never remembered meeting her parents or seeing them out in public. I'm now 27, and I can't seem to find any proof that she exists. All my friends that I was friends with then, I'm still friends with now, even after all these years. But why not her? I think her scary story might have had some flaws, but I still wonder what happened in that house. I've driven by there maybe 15 times, and I still wonder if maybe she was one of the ones that never made it out. This is a memory that I have about my family going to the hospital in which I was about to be born. I recently started thinking about this memory again for some reason. It's just something that I cannot find a logical explanation for, considering that I'm a hyper-skeptical guy. The memory is seeing my dad and other family members walking their way out of my grandma's house, where we used to live, to see my mom give birth, my birth, at the hospital. I can perfectly recall how my dad was dressed that day. For the rest of my family, it's kind of a blurred image. My dad was wearing a black blazer and blue tie with pink diagonal stripes, black jeans, and a lighter blue shirt. I remember even how he was walking while smiling, a pretty detailed and vivid sequence of images. So, as expected a couple of years ago, I might have been 20 at the time, I'm 28 now, I was going to tell him about this weird memory. But before that, I decided to ask him first about how he was dressed the day of my birth, to make sure he didn't just go along with the memory to fool me. And yes, you guessed it, it was the exact same way that I remember. He said he perfectly remembers since he planned it beforehand what he was going to wear for the day of my birth. I freaked out so hard. I would ask myself how this is even possible. It just doesn't make any sense. So I started trying to figure this all out, and I came up with a theory. I later dismissed it, but my family used to record my cousins and I all the time in childhood with this old camera, and then put them on VHS tapes. So I started thinking that maybe an uncle of mine or someone else had recorded that moment of my family on the way to the hospital. So I decided to go over all the tapes that I had, plus it's fun watching them. But no, I didn't find anything even remotely close to that image that I had in my mind. Plus, after rewatching my life series on these tapes, I realized they started recording after I turned 1 year old. So, yeah, 1-year-old me tapes were the oldest tapes made, nothing before that. Another thing that I realized, the way that I remember this scene of my family couldn't be recorded in this weird angle and perspective. It was like I was looking at them walking, but also being careful to not be seen, kind of hiding a little bit behind a wall. Kind of an odd way to record something, right? So that's my story about this weird yet accurate and vivid memory that I have before I was even born. I'm still trying to make sense out of it. Every time I start thinking about it, I can't stop until I sleep. actually overheard this on the news a few years back, about a cryptid in Kentucky. It's a feline-like creature, said to look like a mountain lion mixed with some sort of monstrosity. I didn't really think much about it until my friend, we'll call him Bran, told me what he saw when he was deer hunting. It was pretty late, and he and his dad were about to pack up. They heard a low growl near them. His dad told him to get back up in the hunting perch. I'm not a hunter by any means, so don't crucify me for not knowing the correct lingo. Bran did and watched through his binoculars to watch for what had made the growl, or for his dad to give him an all good. He watched for what he said might have been 10 to 15 minutes when movement caught his eye. He tried to get a better look when he saw the weird creature that I mentioned earlier. It scared him so badly that he froze. He thought it was just a mountain lion or a bobcat, but it had 4 eyes. His dad managed to distract it off by startling a nearby doe. It left, chasing its newfound prey. He and his dad waited until they couldn't hear it, and then booked it back to their truck. He was pretty shaken up the whole week after. I felt bad for him. However, this wasn't his only run-in with a cryptid or a strange creature. Despite being underage, he still does a lot of dangerous or stupid things, such as drinking and driving, smoking cigarettes, and other really dumb things. He's not shy about it either. Well, he'd been doing that first one, but wasn't totally drunk yet, and his best friend, we'll call him Dave, was taking a joyride with him on some back roads, which aren't hard to find in our region. They were messing around, having a good time, blaring music, teenager things. He was focusing on the road, listening to a story Dave was telling him, when he saw a strange, pale, humanoid, quadrupedal, fleshy creature with visible teeth and large black eyes run out onto the road. Bran hit his brakes and just barely missed it. It screeched at him and ran off into the woods on the other side of the road. Bran and Dave sat there trying to process what had happened and if what they both saw was real. They stopped drinking and went straight back to Dave's house, where they proceeded to freak out. They told me this story too as I sat next to them in a couple of classes. Well, I asked them to describe the creature to me, as I'm known for researching and collecting information on cryptids, urban legends, and monsters, and they felt I could help. After they gave me the description, I came up with a list of possible creatures and showed them art and, quote, real pictures of them on Bran's phone. Once we got to Wendigos, skinwalkers, and the rake, they showed clear signs of distress. I pulled up one of the well-known rake pictures and showed it to them. I thought Bran was going to have a heart attack. He yelled, "That's it! It has to be! It's almost dead on!" Dave scrolled through the related pictures and found a different photo and quietly showed both of us. Bran then fell silent. They both said that was it. That was the creature they nearly hit. I told them that they had to be bullshitting me, because the rake is a creepypasta. I told them the story and what it's known for, and that they were not proven to be real and were in fact very likely fake. But they insisted that that's what they saw. They thanked me and asked me if there was a way to protect themselves if it came for them. I told them I didn't know, but fire was probably the best route if it actually was real. They haven't had any experiences since that I know of, but it did freak them and me out a good amount. I was glad I could help them, but now I'm terrified of the woods, more than I previously was, and I question more and more if these legends are just legends. I already believed in a few, but it's just terrifying to think that more of them could be real. These events occurred 2 summers ago in the Grand Teton area. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, let's call him Harry, was an avid outdoorsman and also served in the military. I was an ecology major and wanted to spend more time outdoors, so he decided to take me on my first backpacking trip, just the 2 of us. For those who aren't familiar, the Grand Tetons are well known for their wildlife, specifically grizzly bears. My only experience with bears up to this point was watching a little black bear cross the road from the safety of my car. Seeing grizzly country signs around every corner wasn't doing much to calm my nerves. The first incident. My boyfriend looked like Indiana Jones, machete hanging from his belt, large knives attached to each side of his pack, bear spray strapped to his waist. You get the picture. The beginning of our 25-mile journey was all uphill. When in bear country, you're supposed to make noise so as to not startle the wildlife by accidentally sneaking up on it. As you can imagine, going up a steep hill while carrying a 40-pound pack makes it a little difficult to make conversation. We were an hour in and almost at the top of the ascent. I noticed that the woods had gone completely silent, save for the rushing stream that was to our left of the trail. Silent woods are never a good sign. This usually indicates that predators are nearby. At this point, I was in front of my boyfriend, and we were about to crest the hill. For the past 20 minutes, we hadn't said a word to each other, having been too tired to speak. We noticed the silence at the same time and gave each other knowing glances. I came up over the top of the hill and immediately froze. Sitting not 10 feet in front of me in the middle of the trail was a grizzly bear. My husband wasn't aware yet, as he was behind me, so I did the first thing I could think of. While still in my frozen stance, I managed to take my arm and start flinging it wildly behind me, trying to get Harry's attention. I was too terrified to speak. The bear went from sitting to all fours, not looking away from us once. Harry quickly swung me around so that I was behind him, and he just started yelling. Being in the military, he knows how to yell. The grizzly wasn't quite fazed, as it started to walk slowly toward us. At this point, I was on the verge of passing out from terror. This bear was about 5 feet in front of us when we heard a loud crack coming from the woods to our right. The bear heard it too, and he bolted toward the stream. A second crack boomed again, this time much closer than before. My boyfriend said, "It's probably just some falling branches," but we both knew that wasn't the case. At this point, we were walking quickly up the trail in an attempt to create some distance from the grizzly and those strange noises. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up, and at the same moment, my boyfriend stopped moving in front of me. He turned around to look at me, and I turned around to look behind me. To this day, we're not sure what we saw. Back where we had been standing was a large black-brown mass. It looked to be 3 times bigger than the already large grizzly that we had seen just a few moments before. Its back was facing us, and then it stood on its hind legs. It looked similar to a bear, but something about the shape was just off. At this point, it was probably stupid to run away, but that is exactly what we did. We were aware of heavy footsteps behind us, but neither of us looked back. The footsteps eventually faded. At this point, I was a mess. My boyfriend was doing his best to console me. "Honey, this is extremely unusual. The bears usually stay away from humans. We're going to be okay. I'm sure that won't happen again." That was enough to convince me to continue on the backpack. Not another hour later, though, we reached a clearing where we decided to take a rest and have a snack. About a minute after we had sat down, I noticed bushes moving in a line toward the clearing, toward us. Out of the brush comes this adolescent grizzly, who looks just as spooked as I'm sure we did, but he came straight for us. My husband, being the crazy nut that he is, decided to charge back at the bear while screaming, bear spray at the ready. That did the trick, and the bear ran off. All I could think was, just my luck. But that wasn't even close to what happened the second night. Night 2. Before we began our backpack, we had to let the ranger station know which trails and route we planned to take. With this information, they usually send a ranger on horseback at some point during the backpack to check on you, just to make sure everything is okay. There weren't many approved trails left for us to choose from, and it was just our luck that they were the most difficult. Apparently, over the 3 days that we were on those trails, we had been the sole hikers. We didn't see a single other person once we were en route. However, I guess we missed the ranger who came to check on us. We had been following hoof prints the entire second day, and we hadn't seen any the day before. I had some foot problems, so we spent valuable daylight trying to adjust my boots, laces, and socks to compensate for the pain. When we started on the trail again, we had maybe an hour or two of daylight left, and in the woods, it gets dark fast. I was exhausted. It was now dark out, and Harry was the only one with a working headlamp, as mine wouldn't even turn on for some reason. We needed to find somewhere to set up camp, as we still needed to eat. It was freezing, and the wind was blowing. It was creating a howling sound as it rushed through the trees, which made it difficult to hear Harry or discern any other sounds coming from the woods. After another hour of hiking through the dark, we found a clearing. Well, it was more like a bowl. It looked to be about 200 meters in diameter, with the sides being about 10 meters down from the trail to the bottom of the clearing. This place was strange. We both felt it, though he didn't tell me how freaked he was until after we had left. There was no moonlight, so all we had was the illumination from his headlamp, our small camp stove, and the flashlight that I had fished from my pack. Half of the trees were dead or fallen, but just in the bowl. The vegetation everywhere else was very dense. To help alleviate my anxiousness, he started playing some music out of his portable speaker. This didn't help much, as it just echoed off the trees, creating a dissonance of sounds. He also thought that it would ward off any predators nearby. This is when we knew our anxiety was not paranoia. The silence was back. There hadn't been a single bird chirp since we arrived at the clearing. It also may have had to do with the obnoxious music, but because of our previous experience, we decided to turn off the music and head into the tent. Aside from everything else, it was freezing. As soon as we were situated in our sleeping bags, we heard deep cracks and thuds echoing from beyond the tree line. Falling trees? There had been a lot of wildfires and very little rain this season. Thud. We both froze. That sound wasn't an echo. It came from inside the clearing, and it was definitely not a falling tree. Thud. It came from right outside our tent. We both stopped breathing. Harry's hand found mine, and we clung to each other, paralyzed. Something dragged across the outside of our tent, making an indent as it went along. It was thin, almost like a finger. "What is it?" I whispered, shaking. "I don't know. It shouldn't be a person." We're the only ones on this side of the mountain. I was trying my hardest to stifle sobs, trying to listen to what was outside. I could hear steps, but I couldn't decipher what it was. The steps stopped, and then the whole side of the tent was slowly pushed inward. At this point, whatever was outside knew we were inside, so I shined my flashlight at the side of the tent. What I saw made my blood run cold. Pressed into the tent wall was the shape of a human face. I could make out the nose, an open mouth. Each time they breathed, it made the tent around their mouth billow in and out. Harry said, "F that," and pulled a Glock from his sleeping bag. He cocked it, and the sound shattered the silence. The face pulled back, and we heard fast footsteps heading toward the edge of the clearing. We didn't leave the tent till the sun was shining the next morning. The first thing we noticed was the smell of urine. We came out of the tent and looked around. Whoever it was had peed on our coals that we had left on the fire, leaving a disgusting stench of evaporated pee. Footprints surrounded our tent, circling around it multiple times. Muddy handprints decorated the outside of our tent. At least, we think it was mud. The takeaway? Wildlife is not the most dangerous thing in the backcountry. If you're from Northeast Ohio, you've definitely heard about Squires Castle in Willoughby. And like many other places in Willoughby, Squires is said to be haunted. My whole life, I've said this is bogus. In fact, the ghost stories that I heard of it felt practically impossible. It's said that at night, through the windows, you can see the lantern light of the owner's wife who died there. This can't be true, because she didn't die there. But I don't know, whatever, I guess. Still, everything I believed about this place changed when some friends and I went ghost hunting the other night. We went in so excited. We had planned to walk up to the castle, look through, and maybe even explore the hiking trails afterwards, all late at night. It was drizzling, not very much, no big storms or anything at the time that we were out there. At right about midnight, driving towards Squires, maybe about a mile away, the three of us in the car saw a bright light in the sky, somewhat above where the castle was. One of us initially thought it was lightning, but it definitely wasn't. It was bright, produced no sound, and lasted just a couple of seconds. It happened twice, lighting up a circle of clouds in a white, bluish-purple light. We didn't think too much of it at the time, but now it feels like it should be included in the story. Then at about 12:05, we pulled up to Squires Castle. From the road, before even pulling into a parking spot, we could see it. The lantern. There was an orange glow coming from inside the castle, and it was moving. Initially, I thought it was a house behind the castle. Then I remembered nothing was behind the castle except dense trees. It couldn't have been my headlights because they weren't even pointing that way, and we weren't moving. One of my friends thought it was just some teens exploring the castle like we had planned to do. But as we pulled into the parking spaces, we saw that there were no other cars, and that the light had disappeared. After gathering enough courage, we left the car and started toward the castle. I was recording on a handheld camera, one friend was recording video on his phone, and my other friend was recording audio on her phone. We walked all the way up until we could see the castle. I personally didn't see much, but my friends saw quite a bit. Watching his phone, my friend said things like, "I saw something flash by on my camera," or There's something moving around inside. My other friend felt a little gross. If you've had the same kind of encounter, I'm sure you'll know what she means. She also said that she saw things moving inside, that she was looking with just her eyes and no camera. My friend said she really wanted to go into the building, but my other friend and I wanted to get out of there, me especially. So we turned back toward the car and walked back. On the way back, we were still kind of exploring, thinking that maybe we could see things on the side of the path, but we weren't sure. Then, my friend half-jokingly said, "I low-key want to go back up and into the castle." Shortly after she said this, boom, a heavy stomp could be heard right next to my friend. "Nope," she said and ran. The two of us ran after her. My friend said that they heard the stomp and could feel the presence of something right next to them. We got in the car and drove off so fast. All of us were in shock. I was holding back tears. I didn't know what to feel. I had never experienced anything like that before. On our 20-minute drive home, we decided to examine our evidence. First up was the audio recording. We listened back to it, and my friend stopped it shortly after it started. She was like, "What? Why is it like that? That's so weird." The audio recording started as normal. We leave the car, and then we're heading back to the car. The part of the recording where we walked up to the castle and all that was completely missing. We've never had any issues with her phone before. In fact, we've used that exact phone to catch the voices of multiple entities in the past. Then we moved on to the phone video. You can see lots of misty drizzle moving past the camera, and sometimes you can see my friend's breath. It was surprisingly cold for being 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit the whole day. But when we're up at the castle, the video gets a little spooky. We paused the video on the flashes that he saw earlier and saw single frames of shapes running past. These things were differently shaped and colored than the misty water droplets. These were the most terrifying things that we got from the trip, in my opinion. We also got one picture that was kind of clear, and whatever it was, wasn't really too human-shaped. Also, we could very faintly see shapes of people or reflections of eyes inside the windows. Then, on the way back from the castle, we didn't see anything in the video. Recently, I examined my video on a computer. Now, typically people save the best for last, but my video was not the best. I saw very little within it, as it was very dark. But on our way up, we could see a couple of orbs, and on the way back, we could see small points that kind of looked like sets of eyes, peering and blinking. Looking back on the experience, we are kind of filled with dread. My friend is very spiritually active and knowledgeable, and feels that we could have been in some serious danger. She said she's definitely adding this to her list when she's felt unsafe from the presence of some kind of entity. I guess we might never know what exactly we experienced that night, but we'll never forget it. In a harrowing moment, Reddit user Cherry Cranberries encountered a police officer who saved their life. But was it an officer or an angel? You decide. I was telling this story to someone today. I haven't spoken about this story in many years, but I thought I might share it. This happened about 10 years ago. I was barely 20 years old, living in Massachusetts. I was driving to my college at the time. I commuted to school. And this particular day was very snowy, icy, and sleeting. I don't know why school was in session, but in the Northeast, they don't take bad weather very seriously. I think we've all seen the memes of cars with piles of snow on them saying that they're heading to work. That's just New England for you. So anyway, I'm driving to school and I was late. The road which I was driving on was a 2-lane highway that was very steep. Between the two lanes were Jersey barriers, and the opposite flow of traffic was on the other side. Like many roads here, there are no shoulders, and there was no turnaround. Once you were on this highway, you had to drive another 5 miles before you could pull off to the closest exit. It was the type of highway where if your car stopped, you were pretty much screwed because there was nowhere to pull off. Again, no shoulders or grass, just concrete barriers on both sides and a barrier in the middle. It was a dangerous highway that many people had died on. Even a friend of my mom's coworker had died on it. I was driving pretty fast for the type of weather I was in. I was in the far left lane and could see a tractor trailer in the far right, but behind my car. Suddenly, my car fishtailed and I spun out completely. I was suddenly in the far right lane, facing oncoming traffic. The tractor trailer was coming at me. Like, coming at me. There was no time or place to go. I remember this feeling came over me, like my brain didn't register what was happening. And suddenly, out of nowhere, my car was in reverse, and I was in a miracle of a small shoulder, but still facing oncoming traffic. I don't know how it happened, and I remember being in shock. Like, how did that just happen? The tractor trailer blew past me in seconds. I mean, I would have been literal toast if I hadn't gotten to that shoulder. Breathing really heavily, I said to myself, did I really just do that? Within what must have been 10 to 15 seconds, I hear a few knocks on my driver's side window. I open the window, and a young male police officer is now staring right at me. He says, "Hey, I saw your car spin out." I see the lights behind now, and his car parked right behind me, in the same small squeeze of a shoulder that we had, which ended quickly up ahead. Clearly seeing me in what probably looked like total shock, he continued and said, "You were going too fast." I said, "Yeah, I know." And then he says, in this soft but direct tone, "Stop rushing. Why are you rushing? You need to relax, okay? Relax." It was something like that. He then says how he's going to stop the traffic so I can turn my car around the proper direction and get back on the road. It's fuzzy how he did it, but I just remember him stopping the flow. I turned my car around out of the shoulder. Remember that my car was facing the wrong direction, so I wouldn't have been able to do that without his intervention. And slowly I pulled it back in the proper direction that I was supposed to be going in. I continued on and I looked behind me. Normally, you can see a cop pull out after you, see their lights on or the car themselves if they turn it off or whatever. But all I saw were the cars that were waiting for me to drive. It's weird to explain, but this cop disappeared in seconds. I mean, disappeared. And like I said, there was nowhere for him to go. The only turnaround, that small cutout median that cops tend to use to go in different directions, wasn't for another mile ahead, and the first exit off wasn't for another 5 miles. The small little shoulder ended up right where I was, and this cop was nowhere to be seen. It was so weird. I remember looking back several times in my mirror and saying out loud, "Where did he go?" It was so odd that I thought about it all day. I came home and told my parents what had happened. Of course, in shock that my car spun out in the opposite direction and I almost hit a tractor trailer, I told them exactly where this took place, how my car went into reverse. How, I have no recollection, and of the magical cop that showed up in 10 seconds and disappeared just as fast. My own parents thought that it was the strangest thing. I've told this story to a few people I know, and they've also thought it was weird. I think, and my parents agreed, that either that cop was sent by God at the exact moment I needed help, or he wasn't really a cop at all. It's been a decade, and I still think about this encounter. Without that man, I wouldn't have been able to get back onto the highway, unless I had taken a great risk or sat there in confusion and shock with the possibility of someone else hitting me, while snow, ice, and sleet fell on my car. It was a very peculiar and life-saving encounter, and whoever it was, I won't soon forget it. I have a ghost in my life, and I have named him Toby, the name from the Paranormal Activity franchise. It's to make light of a creepy situation. Oddly enough, I would say that 98% of my encounters with my ghost, I was never alone. There was usually another person with me when he would make an appearance. This all started with a single photo that I took. I should give more context. So before I moved out for school, I lived on an acreage with my dad and brother, and this area has small abandoned buildings everywhere that can be easily explored. So between the ages of 17 and 18, I had some friends over, 2 guys and 3 girls including myself, and we would go exploring and get our spook on. We had some scary moments, but I am also chalking it up to overactive imaginations and purposefully scaring each other. This time was no different than the others, we thought. We went to this little church near my dad's house and we did some exploring. We managed our way in and looked around. The girls and I spooked ourselves and hightailed it back to the truck, and the guys were laughing at us. I decided to take a picture of them. I was periodically taking photos throughout the night. The next day, we all woke up and I was looking through my photos and noticed that I had captured something else in one particular photo. It really creeped me out, but it eventually was just forgotten. Not long after, I started having nightmares. And these nightmares are recurring and can last anywhere between one night to a whole year. I am 24 years old now, and I still get them. Initially, I didn't put 2 and 2 together, until a friend of mine noticed my ghost and nightmares started happening at the same time. My nightmares are also important to my spooky happenings, or at least I feel like they are. Now for the meat of the story. A few months after graduating high school, I moved 8 hours away from home with my best friend and then boyfriend for college. At the time, I have been getting this particular nightmare of a horse being dismembered alive, and I was stuck in place and couldn't do anything to help. It was disrupting my sleep, and I would say that I was having this nightmare anywhere between 1 to 3 times a week for a year. A year and a half later, after moving to this new city, things happened and my best friend and I were looking for somewhere else to live. We'd asked a friend that we'd become very close with to move in with us. We found a little 3-bedroom townhouse on the west side of the city. We also had the best friend's brother and my cousin staying in the basement temporarily. It was a cramped house, but we made it work. The townhouse is when Toby made his first appearance. The layout of this place was simple. You walk in, there are stairs going up to your right, and straight ahead, you can see the kitchen and living room. They were separated by a wall. I believe this was a Friday or a Saturday night in the wintertime in Canada, because I remember fondly that I was home alone and the others were out being busy. I was in the living room studying with no TV on, and I heard this very distinct man sneeze come from the kitchen. I just froze because it was so unexpected and so close. I remember going through the entire house to see if I was truly alone. Once I realized that I was indeed by myself, I called my best friend and told her to come home because I was scared. They ended up laughing at me because they just assumed that I had an active imagination, but oh boy, were they going to find out that they were wrong. Around this time, I was nightmare free for maybe a few months, and after Toby's first appearance, they started up again, but it was a different one. I had a recurring dream of me watching this man being eaten alive by a bear, and again I was frozen in place and I couldn't help. So a month or so after the sneeze, my friend and roommate and I were watching TV. We were the only ones home at the time, and our stairway had photos and paintings in frames. Every single one of them came crashing down at the same time. The stairway has no windows in it, and it was cold outside, so no wind could have knocked them down. We went to investigate, and every single one of them was on the ground. We were pretty scared at that point, but we hung them back up. Over a period of time, we would learn that we couldn't keep anything on the walls. After some time, we had to move out due to the landlord selling the place, and we moved to this condo. It was a beautiful place. I started getting more and worse nightmares, and they were alternating between 4 dreams. 2 events happened in this condo, and I also forgot to mention that I had 2 cats this entire time. They began to interact with Toby in this place. For the first occurrence, all of us were sitting on the couch in the living room, and the couch is parallel with the stairs going up. It was nighttime, and both cats got fuzzy-tailed and stared intently upstairs, growling. Everyone who lived at this place was in the living room. It creeped us out, but we just made a joke out of it and tried to keep it light. For the second occurrence, I was having a brand new nightmare. In my dream, I was actively being decapitated, and in real life, my neck was getting hot. I couldn't breathe, and I felt like I was falling out of consciousness, but I woke up screaming, crying, and holding my neck. Then I thought I saw something by the door. My then boyfriend woke up to my screaming and said he thought he saw something in the room, but that it was so dark it could have been nothing. I hadn't mentioned that I also saw something until after he said something, and this is when I started to fear Toby. We lived there for about a year and a half, roughly, before the other girls moved in with their boyfriends, and I moved into a big house that my then boyfriend's family owned. The mother and sister said that they felt uneasy in that house when they visited, but I figured it couldn't be worse than my nightmares. So I had 2 people move in with me, and they experienced things as well. The nightmares were becoming less severe, and I was down to just 1 nightmare, maybe 1 to 2 a week, and it was a small kitten being tortured. It made me really sad in real life, and I would wake up unhappy. This house has 2 sub-basements, and the first sub-basement was a second living room. The second one had a bedroom with no windows, a bathroom, and a laundry. Our stuff was going missing and then turning up in random places. The front door would just open. My brother came down to visit me, and my other 2 roommates were working. We were watching a spooky movie in the living room sub-basement, and my one cat was sitting on the arm of the couch that we were sitting on. She quickly turned her head toward the stairs going down, got up all fuzzied up, and stared intently at the darkness. Her eyes followed something that we couldn't see to the stairs going up. She laid back down but wouldn't look away from the stairs. My brother looked at me and said that that was damn creepy, and I agreed. A couple of months later, I was doing laundry, and my roommate's bedroom door starts to shake quite violently as he was headed to his room. We both just stood there, looking at the door, perplexed, and suddenly it just stopped. He didn't want to enter his room alone, so I went in with him for peace of mind. Everything was normal in the room, so I left to finish the laundry. It was rather creepy. I moved again. I know, I move a lot. And I lived with my best friend and her boyfriend in June 2018. This is when all Toby occurrences and nightmares completely stopped. Like, as soon as I moved in. It was wonderful. I took the silence for granted, though. A week before Christmas, I experienced my first form of sleep paralysis. And I say form because it wasn't the classic type of sleep paralysis. This scared me so badly to the point that I could not sleep at all the rest of the night and was noticeably off for the day. My sleep paralysis, I had no idea that I was asleep. Like, honestly, I had no idea that I was asleep. I thought everything happening in my dream was real. I could move, or it felt like moving. In this dream, I was on YouTube, and randomly a deep web YouTube took over. This horribly graphic video was flooding my screen, and I felt the panic of trying to get rid of it, to force it to shut down. But the videos just wouldn't go away. I was in full panic mode, and I couldn't stop it. And then I woke up. I was really bothered because I had zero idea that I was asleep. I felt like I could feel the laptop in my hands, and I still felt the panic. After that radio silence since March of 2019, my male cat, who was 6, died suddenly with no previous medical conditions. My friends believe it was Toby. I moved in with my current boyfriend, and I hadn't had any nightmares since Christmas of last year, and no Toby, until last weekend. He plucked the boyfriend's acoustic guitar loudly and distinctly, and I also had a new nightmare last night. So far, these are all of my occurrences, but this is definitely an ongoing situation. I just want to live my life in peace. Update. So, this morning, my boyfriend wakes me up at 5:30 a.m. He leaves at 6 a.m., and I wake up at 7 a.m. I had a new nightmare in that hour of being alone. I woke up to this feeling of just gloom, since I hate these types of nightmares. My cat sits with me as I put on my makeup on the couch, and I hear stuff falling and quiet thumps downstairs. I found the blanket cupboard was open, and all of the blankets were on the ground. I can only imagine what Toby will do next. My husband told me this story the other day. This security guard, now a middle-aged man, had no idea that the two of us were active on Reddit, but he wanted us to tell his story, so here it is. I was a young man back then and had been working on the job for a few years now. I was a security guard, working the security detail in a large shopping mall. Back then, shopping malls were a new phenomenon in the country, and people had no idea how to guard them properly. There weren't exactly a lot of us on the security detail. I was joined by a very young man, inexperienced. It was probably the first time he'd been on a job like this, and this older gentleman who had been working security all across the area. I'd only been on the job for about a fortnight. We were all just sitting around on our posts. I had expected another slow night at the mall. Things didn't really happen in our part of the city. It must have been around midnight when I started hearing the clanking of chains from the basement area. The sound was so loud that it startled me. I sat up in my seat and became attentive. Maybe I was mistaken. But as the clanking continued, I realized it was definitely coming from the basement area. Confused, I paced around for a bit until the younger guard came running toward me. He asked me about the sound. I told him I had no idea what it was. After a bit of discussion, we decided to go check it out. We grabbed a torch, informed the older gentleman, and started descending into the basement below. The mall had shops in the basement, but the sound was coming from the storage area, and that was extremely unusual. No one had access to the basement except for a handful of employees, including the three of us. There was only a single elevator that could take you to that floor and a set of stairs. The young guard and I opted for the stairs, mainly because we wanted to surprise or potentially scare whoever was making those sounds. By the time we descended to the ground floor, our torch turned off. This alarmed the two of us. We were already creeped out. The young man had already started to sweat. I told him not to worry, reminded him that we had guns if something went south, and opened a small single door that opened into the basement. As you can expect, it was pitch black. All we could hear was the clanking, now louder and right in front of us. I was afraid for my life. We could have been attacked at any moment. My heart started to race. I banged the flashlight on my leg and it sprung to life. There was an empty chair right in front of us, a few meters from the door. The clinking continued. Shaking, I pointed the flashlight around and saw the most bizarre scene unfolding. Metal chains, where they'd come from I had no idea, we had no chains in storage, were being moved from one end of the basement to the other. I could see them gleam in the torch's light. I was stunned. No one was carrying them. The young guard I had brought with me was already screaming. I pointed the flashlight around until it landed on the chair. Only now, there was a middle-aged man sitting on it. Looking at us, he had a terrifying expression on his face. He was clearly angry. A weird gust of wind blew by me, and the torch fell to the floor. The young man screamed again and became unconscious. All the while, the chains continued moving. I was so frightened that I ran, leaving the young man on the floor of the basement with God knows what. Something I still feel bad about to this day. Let me set the scene. I used to own a house near the mountains on the northern side of Colorado. This was a period of time where I had just gotten fired from a job because of pandemic-related reasons and was home alone. I lived with my roommate at the time, but he went out to some club that night, leaving me home alone with my dog. I hate to even think of this, and this is the first time I've ever told anybody besides my neighbors. It was around 8 p.m. on a Friday, and I was watching Friends on TV. While watching, I heard what sounded like boxes shuffling around in the basement. My dog immediately noticed this and brought his head up. Our basement wasn't finished, and we had a window down there which wasn't in good shape, so I had just brushed it off thinking that the wind was making noises. After a while, the noises never stopped. I decided to grab my light and head down there with my dog. I grabbed my light from the kitchen and opened the door to the basement. I started walking down the stairs, calling my dog. The only odd thing was that my dog wouldn't come down with me and was making that little high-pitched noise that dogs make when they aren't happy or whatever. He refused to go down into the basement and just stood at the top of the stairs. To give you perspective on how my basement was laid out, all of my extra stuff from my childhood, like clothes and things like that, were piled in the back right corner. So when you walked down the stairs, on the very right was where all that stuff was. And all my roommate's stuff was right next to mine on the left. There was a bench with all of the previous owner's stuff that they had left there too. While going down there, the sound was still very clear, and it was getting louder the farther I got in. I saw the window opened and making noises, and decided to go and close it, thinking it was nothing else. As soon as I closed it, it felt like a hand grabbed my leg, but it wasn't a normal hand. It was super hot. My legs were swooped back and I fell down. All I can remember from this point on was my dog barking extremely loudly. I then woke up and found myself in the closet of my roommate's bedroom. I walked downstairs and looked at the time. and it was 3 o'clock. My roommate wasn't back yet. I literally looked at the clock and grabbed my phone and dog and ran outside the front door. I went over to the neighbors, which was a mile away. I ran there with bare feet. I didn't have a car at the time. When I got to the neighbors, whom I barely knew, I ringed the doorbell extremely fast. About a minute later, a man opened the door and asked why I was ringing his doorbell this late at night. I could tell he was quite frustrated with me. I told him everything, and he said that the previous owners moved out because the husband of the house ended up hanging himself in the basement. We talked for a bit while I let my dog run around in the back. I called my roommate to not go home and to come over to the neighbors. Around an hour later, he showed up, and we all just sat there talking about what had happened. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, I headed back to my house with my roommate to find the sofa flipped, all the doors open, and the cabinets in the kitchen all open, with dishes broken on the floor. I decided to go live with my sister and sell the house around 2 months later. To this day, I'm not sure what that was, and I haven't had any other experiences. I had just broken up with my girlfriend at the time. I heard that ghosts, especially when they die like that, thrive off of bad energy or whatever, so maybe that's why everything happened. I don't know. But if you have a way to explain it, let me know. This is by far the spookiest experience my family and I have ever had regarding the paranormal. I'm currently living in Australia, and this all started when I moved into my current house around 3 years ago. In my culture, we believe that whenever a family moves into a new home, a priest should come to perform various prayers to bless the house. However, when my mom bought the house, we immediately went on holiday for 3 months, so we were unable to perform the rituals. Everything started when we first came back to our house. Just some background. My mom raised me on her own, so it was just the two of us staying in the house at the time. I was still in high school, and my mom worked in the city, so we both took the train every morning. My mom always left home earlier than I did, so it was my job to lock up every morning. My mom worked late almost every day, so I would get home first and be home alone for at least 5 hours every day. One morning as I left home, I began to feel paranoid that I had not locked the door, so I went back to check it. The door was locked. Later that day when I came home from school, I walked up my driveway to find that the door was standing wide open. I freaked out, but because I was brave enough, I went inside. Our kitchen is pretty close to the entrance, so I grabbed a knife and searched the entire house. There was no one there. I decided not to tell my mom because she was already really stressed with work, and I didn't want her to freak out. Over the next few days, other strange things started happening. For one, our garage door would randomly start opening whenever we were home. My mom was kind of scared, but then we thought maybe our neighbor's garage remote functioned at the same frequency or something, and it was activating our door too, so we dismissed it. It had been about 2 months since we were living in our new house, and everything seemed to be normal again. Until one day, when I was awoken in the middle of the night by my mom. She looked super scared and asked me if I had come to her room to wake her up. I said no, I was half asleep and I had no idea what she was rambling on about. She didn't believe me and made me swear that I hadn't. I always play scare pranks on my family, so I can kind of see why. I swore I didn't, and I asked her what was going on. My mom is a super light sleeper, and so while she was sleeping, she heard somebody prop her door open. She looked up and saw the figure of a boy and thought it was me. So she asked it what was wrong and blinked, and there was nothing there, but her door was still open. She called my name a few times, and there was no response, hence why she came into my room. I have to admit, given the stuff happening with the doors, I was kind of scared, but I convinced my mom that she was imagining things, and she went back to sleep. Ever since that night, up to this very day, my mom still sleeps with her door open and the living room light on, and I don't blame her, especially after what happened next. 2 weeks after this incident occurred, my mom's best friend and her son and daughter, they were both around my age, came over from our homeland, Malaysia, to visit us. I was really excited, as I've always been close to them. One thing you should know about my aunt, she's had many experiences growing up with the paranormal, so she's super scared of ghosts. For this reason, her kids and I always used to play pranks on her. One day, the 4 of us were playing poker on the dining table while my mom was taking a nap in the living room. Suddenly, my mom rushes out of the living room, her eyes wide open, and she looked really scared. She asked who had woken her up from her nap. The 4 of us were completely dumbfounded, as we'd been playing cards the entire time. She then told us that she felt someone tap her shoulder while she was asleep. When she opened her eyes, there were 2 feet on the floor, but when she blinked, the feet were gone and nobody was there. My mom was full-on freaking out now, especially after what had happened the other night. Then my aunt, given how afraid she is of ghosts, started to freak out too. I didn't want her holiday to be ruined, so I managed to convince them that my mom was probably in the middle of a dream when she woke up, and she was probably just hallucinating. I know it sounds stupid, but hey, it worked. But then the next day, something else happened. My mom had gone to the shops to get groceries. The kids and I were playing video games in the living room, while their mom was having a shower. Suddenly we heard the bathroom door burst open, and out runs my aunt wrapped in her towel. She screamed at us, telling us to stop trying to scare her, and that it wasn't funny. The 3 of us were super confused, and her daughter asked her what had happened. She told us that she knew that we were the ones knocking on the bathroom door, even after she told us to stop 3 times. I know it probably seems like she was overreacting, but I cannot emphasize how afraid of ghosts she is. I exchanged a concerned look with her kids, and then told her that it genuinely was not us and that we'd been playing video games the entire time. Soon my mom got home and we told her what happened. Let's just say that my aunt started sleeping with her room lights on for the rest of the trip. Soon my aunt and her kids had gone home, and it was back to me and my mom again. We were back to our regular routine. My mom was finally at peace, and she hadn't seen anything for a while, apart from the same thing with the garage door every once in a while. The same, however, could not be said for me. It seemed that it had come to be my turn to be tormented. As I mentioned before with my mom at work, I would be home alone for a few hours every day. I began to start hearing things. The strange thing is, it would never occur while I was in the living room. Whenever I went to use the toilet or went to sit in my room, I would start hearing things coming from the living room and kitchen. It started out small, just the sound of some panting, like if you'd just run a long distance. But the minute that I entered the living room, nothing. There would be no sound at all. It soon started to get worse. I would hear footsteps pacing around outside my room, and spoons and pots falling in the kitchen. But every time that I stepped out into the living room, the noises would stop, and everything would be just as I had left it. There was even a time when I thought I heard a kid laughing right outside the door when I was using the toilet. I decided not to tell my mom yet because she seemed to be getting over her experiences, and I didn't want to scare her again. But one day I felt that I needed to tell her, and we decided that that day it was time we contacted our priest to perform the prayers for our house. It was the day that my best friend and his parents came over for dinner. It all started as an innocent dinner. My best friend and his family were Malaysian too, and we were having a great time talking about home while having a signature Malaysian meal. My friend's dad was telling us a story, when all of a sudden, his face just froze, and his eyes widened. He honestly looked like he was having a stroke. His face contorted into a frown, and he just stared down at the table. My mom and I shared a worrying look, but my friend and his mom just continued eating like nothing was happening. Suddenly, his dad seemed to return to us, and he continues telling the story as if nothing just happened. He could see, though, that my mom and I looked worried. Suddenly, his wife tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Just tell them." He frowned at his wife and just kept eating. There was an awkward silence for a few minutes, and then he finally decided to address the elephant in the room. He apologized for scaring us and assured us that there was no need to worry. He then went on to tell us about his life. Since he was a child, he'd been very religious, and from a young age, he felt a very close connection to God. He regularly meditated and was very spiritual. He was so spiritual that when he came into his mid-20s, he had awoken a gift. He was able to see dead people. I kid you not. When he said this, I immediately looked at my friend, waiting for him to start laughing at some prank. But my friend's face was dead serious, and he continued looking at his dad as he told the story. He told us that he could see them everywhere, when he was walking his dog on the street, when he was sitting in the park, in people's houses, and even sometimes sitting on people who had been possessed. He said the spirits were drawn to him because they knew he could see them, and they would stalk him, begging him to help them reach the afterlife. He said there was simply nothing he could do, because these people had died before their time, and that they would simply have to wait on Earth until it was their time. Back home, he was regularly contacted by people having paranormal experiences to perform a cleansing to drive evil spirits away. He told us about some of those experiences, but I don't feel like it's my place to share them here. He then asked us something that gave me chills. "Have you guys performed the prayers for your house yet?" My mom refused to answer the question until he told her why he had asked it. He said that he didn't want to worry us, and that if we hadn't, we probably should. My mom continued to ask him why, until he finally conceded, and this is what he said. "Remember when I had that moment just now while I was talking? I had a visit. I won't tell you what it was, but it was the same spirit I saw standing at the front door when we came here." That's when my mom told him everything that had been happening. It's during this time that I decided to tell my mom about the things that I'd been hearing in the house. My friend's dad then told us that he didn't think it was a malicious spirit, but to be safe, it was time for us to conduct the prayers for the house. Before he left, he asked my mom if he could see our altar in the prayer room. My mom took him, and we all followed him. As he stood in front of the altar, his body suddenly shook, as if he had just had a huge hiccup or something. He then put his hands together and bowed his head. Before leaving, he said, "I can see why the two of you have not been hurt. You are both protected." And that concluded their visit. A week later, we arranged for a priest from our local temple to cleanse and bless our home. I promise you that since that day, nothing strange has ever happened in our house. Even the garage door has stopped opening on its own. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I've learned my lesson. I will never move into a new house without performing the rituals that my culture demands. I was a child of divorce, and as such, was often taken by my dad on weekends when I was a kid. He spent most of that time waxing his car at my grandparents, who lived out in nowhere, North Carolina, since he lived in a condo with no hoses to wash his precious. Ignored, my brother and I were typically left to our own devices, and wandered the fields and woods around my granddad's land, which was about a half-hour drive from civilization. My family owned the neighboring homes and great swatches of land between and behind the homes, so we could pretty much explore out there for hours. All this said, there were some really disturbing things that happened there, and I personally think they're either too absurd or too subtle to have been my childhood imagination. You can decide for yourselves, though, and I'd love to hear what you guys think might have been going on. Here are some things I remember. My great uncle was the kind of a jack of all trades. He bought and sold used cars. He also bought wrecks to strip and scrap, dumping the useless husks in a field and the woods up a trail behind his house. My brother and I called this place the car graveyard. On its own, it was eerie, with cars all the way back from the 50s in various states of disrepair. I used to climb inside them, until I got into one that was tacky, with what might have been dried blood. Sometimes I'd find bones out there, deer mostly, but they'd be in odd places, like skulls on car hoods. My guess is that it was just poachers on his land messing around because he didn't hunt, but who knows. I never saw any with skin or fur. One day, my brother and I were going to the car graveyard, but up the trail to it, we started to hear what sounded like pained moaning up ahead, where the derelicts were. We turned tail that day. Oddest, perhaps, from the car graveyard was the one time we actually went really far back to see just how deep the cars went. It continued into the woods for a while, with trees sometimes growing right out of the wrecks. My brother and I saw something ahead that looked like fog or mist, which reminds me of another story, but that's for another day. We didn't think much about it because we were kids, but this was mid-afternoon, and the mist was only in one area. We passed on through and felt inexplicably weird, and decided to give up on seeing just how far back it went. When we got back to my granddad's place, things seemed off. It was really hard to explain. My dad looked like my dad and acted like him, but he didn't feel the same. My brother felt this same dissonance too, and we got this wild idea that when we crossed the fog, we somehow stepped into another dimension, maybe just slightly different from our own. Maybe it was just stupid kid stuff, but I still remember how oppressive this feeling of not belonging was. We booked it back across the fog again, and when we came back, everything immediately felt as right as rain. We went back as an adult to that same spot. No fog, but there was a particularly off-putting sensation. A few other odd things happened out there, but not in the car graveyard. We heard laughter coming from a hole in the woods. I swore that I saw the stereotypical sheet ghost near the woods, but as soon as I looked, they vanished. I regularly saw a face in the shadows between the trees across the field. It reminded me of Morlock from the 60s Time Machine. I saw a log truck carrying a bear on its back that was as tall as a house. It was probably some fiberglass thing for a store or putt-putt golf, but it was still a really odd thing to see. I hesitate to add this one because it's just so goofy, but what the heck. One day my brother and I were messing with my granddad's walkie-talkies, and we saw this really odd-looking bird in the sky. We joked that it looked like a flying monkey from The Wizard of Oz, and said, flying monkey, come in, flying monkey," into the walkie-talkies. Another voice came through and said, "Someone get me a flying banana." A bit spooked, we went into the kitchen and took a banana to leave it outside, and we stayed indoors for the rest of that visit. When we left, only the peel was sitting outside. That's about all I got for that area. A few things happened inside the house too, but that's not really pertinent to this story. A couple of years ago, my pops and I decided to go on a road trip. It was very out of the blue. I wasn't even expecting it, but I decided to go anyway. It would be some solid father-son bonding time. After driving for what seemed like a couple of hours, it was maybe around 8 to 9 p.m., we pulled up into this gas station for snacks and water and to use the bathroom. And we went back inside our car. Keep in mind, this gas station was basically in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, we got back into our car and decided to look for a motel, but there were none. And I mean, there wasn't a single one anywhere near us. My dad was really tired, so we decided to sleep in the car. We pulled up into this sort of resting area / parking lot and decided to go to sleep. My dad fell fast asleep, but I was on my phone for a couple of hours, and around 11 p.m., I just felt suffocated by the tense air, and I decided to step out for a bit. I felt safe because the gas station was still in sight, and there would be a couple of trucks that would occasionally drive by, so I felt at ease. At this time, I was also texting my friend who lives in Seattle, Washington, and we were on the phone for a bit. Then I saw what looked like a large cornfield. I was a city guy, so I'd never seen a cornfield in real life, so I decided to cross the road and just get a closer look. So that's what I did. I walked extremely close and started feeling like I was being watched. But again, I thought, well, you're literally outside in the dark standing next to a tall cornfield. Of course you're going to feel weird. So I brushed it off. I even considered going in, but then I thought, why would I even do that? So anyway, I decided to just take a step back when I noticed a barn. A large white barn with red, maybe black strips. It was hard to tell in the dark, but it surely was a barn. And I was stupid and young when this happened, maybe 14 or 15. So out of curiosity, I decided to just check it out. The barn was next to the cornfield, kind of tucked in a little. I literally thought to myself, I wish I could see something that would freak me out, as a joke, because I never really thought that anything would happen, and I love being scared. Anyway, I started making my way toward the barn. Getting closer and closer, I remember very vividly that I was wearing no socks and just slip-on slides. I remember the dirt rubbing against my toes while I walked. I remember sending pictures to my friend in Washington, jokingly saying that I saw something and I was going to go check it out. As I got closer, I did see something. Behind the barn, but sort of to the side, like how when someone peers from a corner. At first, I thought it was a bell. Literally, I assumed that it was just a bell attached to the corner of the barn, so I just walked closer. I kept moving toward it, and then I saw the head of something or someone just peering around the corner at me. At that moment, I straight up froze. My flight or fight was out of function, apparently, because there I was, literally seeing someone or something peering at the corner, and I didn't do either of those things. After about 5 to 10 seconds, the noise that Snapchat makes when you get a notification snapped me out of it, and I just ran as fast as I could across the road to my dad's car and got in. I felt a sense of relief wash over my body, and somehow my dad was not awake. Me gasping for air wasn't enough to stir him from his sleep, I guess. I really considered waking him up and telling him that we have to leave, and telling him what I saw, but he would assume that I was joking or having some kind of episode, since he's never believed in anything paranormal or out of the ordinary at all. I took deep breaths and just texted my friend telling her what I saw, but she didn't believe me. I don't blame her, and I won't blame any of you either if you don't believe me. I have a hard time actually believing what I saw sometimes, but I know it was real. I was sober and fully aware, but from the bottom of my heart, the part that disturbs me the most is that whatever was peering at me from around that corner was very tall, at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. And every time I think about that, I get a sense of dread and paranoia. I haven't told any of my family, not even my dad. But if any of you have a clue of what I might have seen, let me know. I wasn't hallucinating. And this was way before I figured out anything to do with psychedelics or drugs in general. I've been trying to piece it together ever since it happened. I was sort of 50-50 on paranormal encounters before, but after that experience, I believe. I believe in walkers and wendigos and ghosts and everything pretty much. It's completely changed me. I want to know what's out there. I want to know what I encountered. This incident occurred during the summer of 1983, as I was about to begin my senior year in high school. My family lived in rural Pennsylvania, in northern Indiana County. Our farmhouse was built in the mid-1800s. In the early 1900s, an addition was added to the back that more than doubled the size of the original house. The original house was a 4-square house, so called for the 4 square rooms, 2 on the first floor and 2 on the second floor, with a staircase in the back. The house as a whole was sturdy, albeit a bit cranky. Every night in summer I fell asleep listening to the pops, cracks, creaking, and groans as the house cooled off in the night air. The house was built on high ground, next to the mouth of an ancient ravine that ran for over a mile, deeper and darker and rockier as it went, down to the north branch of a little creek. The ravine was heavily wooded at the beginning. Then the trees got sparser to a few old ones tenaciously rooted into the eroded rocks and glacial till. It was dark and cool and damp down in there, even on the hottest summer day, and I spent many summer days down in those woods. I knew the plants, the trees, the birds, the deer. I heard much that I couldn't see, like the rabbits running through the brush and the squirrels high up scolding me as I walked. I could sense the ones that hid and made no noise, the bobcats lurking and the nocturnal critters and peeking at my back after I passed their burrows. Sometimes sudden waves of total silence would descend on the woods. The air would be still. The birds would silence themselves. I taught myself to stop at these moments and to observe. I knew it wasn't me that made the animals go silent, so I figured something, a bobcat perhaps, was close by. I never saw what it was that caused the silences, but I loved to imagine myself as a skilled tracker. Nothing of the sort, of course, but I will claim to know those woods. I also had a friend and companion that roamed the woods and ravines around with me, a big male German shepherd named Chap. Chap loved to run and roam and chase groundhogs. We prowled along through the woods for years. This particular night, I awoke suddenly, very awake and alert. The wind was blowing against the open window. Our room had the crank-out windows that were popular in the 70s, when the hose had been remodeled. The bottom of the window tilted out and the rain ran off. There was a low rumble off in the distance, the thunder of a summer storm blowing in from the west. I was laying on my belly, my face on the left side on my pillow, and my arms around and under my pillow. I listened to the rain. It was not unusual for me to wake up in the middle of the night. It's been a regular occurrence in my life since I was very young. By that point, I was 17 years old. I was used to my 3 a.m. ritual, though still very irritated by it. Across the room, I could hear my brother breathing. I could hear our dog lying on the foot of my brother's bed, sniffing at the rainy night air blowing in the window. Across the hall from our room, I could hear my dad's low, steady, rumbling snore. Then I heard something that made my eyes fly open in the pitch-black room. From down in the ravine, off in the distance, I heard an animal call unlike any I had ever heard. It was a roar, an angry roar. To the best of my knowledge, the apex predator in those woods was the bobcat, but this was too deep, too throaty for a bobcat. Then I heard it again, surprisingly closer, a lot closer. I listened for my brother's breathing. Silence. He was awake. "What was that?" I loudly whispered. "I don't know," he whispered back. There was obvious concern in his voice. Then we heard it again. It had to be no more than 75 feet from the house, down at the corner of the yard where the trail led into the woods and down into the ravine. First of all, it was no bobcat. It was not a dog. It was not a coyote, and it was most definitely not a man. Next to my bed was a softball bat. I still have it, as a matter of fact. That night, all I wanted in the world was to slide my hand out from under the pillow and reach down and grab that bat. But I couldn't move. Everyone in the house seemed paralyzed. I kept expecting to hear my dad throw his bedroom door open, but he never made a sound. Then, two things happened in rapid succession. There was a tremendous crash, like something or someone had run headlong into the house. Then there was another roaring, screaming howl, this time right next to the house. It was an angry, roaring shout, so loud that I felt like it was next to my face. I had never in all my life heard an animal make a noise that loud. It was like a V8 engine with straight pipes was running wide open throttle. At the same time, there was a throbbing, a low-frequency growl that seemed to make the house vibrate. All I could do was close my eyes and try to scream, but nothing came out. I must have passed out. The next thing I know, it was morning. The sun was shining. The house was still there. I slept in, which was very unusual in my family. I went downstairs, and my dad and brother had already left for the day. My mom stood at the sink, washing dishes. I looked at my mom wide-eyed. Surely she had heard what happened. She met my eyes and pointed to the back porch of our house, a small side room that housed the washing machine, dryer, and coat closet. I walked to the back porch to see that the door that led to the outside had been ripped from its hinges and lay flat on the floor of the porch. In the coat closet, with his nose pressed as far back as it could go, laying in a puddle of his own urine, was Chap. He lay there, whimpering for 2 days before he finally came out again. I was given the task to fix the door. When it was up and repaired, I went to my mom and basically asked, "Are we just gonna pretend that nothing happened last night?" My mom sighed with obvious exasperation and said something along the lines of, "Well, what would you like to know? You know what that was. Your dad knows. I know. We all know. Not much to talk about, other than how scary it was, and frankly, I don't need to talk about that, thank you." And for my family, that was pretty much the end of it. I brought it up once not long ago. My dad just shrugged and said, "I know as much now as I did that night." Me? I drive there on occasion, when I'm in the area. I stop on the old country road and listen a while. I listen to the wind and the birds, and then I drive on. This story is 100% true and takes place in Cincinnati, Ohio, specifically Claremont County. I'm female, 31 years old now, and this happened in 2006. So at the time, I was 17 going on 18. My boyfriend we'll call Mark, my friend we'll call Amy, and her boyfriend, now husband, we'll call Neil, are the ones involved in this unexplained event. So for some background first, there is this abandoned cabin in the middle of the woods. You can only get to it by walking about a mile one way. There are abandoned cars, an ambulance, some tractors, and some other random vehicles, like a short school bus, and they're all covered in gunshots. There's not even a path to drive a vehicle back there. If there were, we'd be walking a mile one way to get to them, so I'm not even sure how they got there or how long they've been there. My boyfriend and I had gone with 2 other friends previously to this encounter, and it was creepy, but it was nothing compared to what happened when we went with Amy and Neil. So on our previous trip, we went with our friends that we'll call T and J. T and myself went upstairs and we had a Ouija board. We just asked random stupid questions that I can't even remember. What I do remember is that it spelled out hooey, and we thought that was funny. We said goodbye on the board and we were looking around the upstairs, which was really just an attic. We found massive kids' socks in the walls, like tons of them. It was really random and weird. We got startled when an alarm clock started ticking. It wouldn't stop, so I smashed it to pieces, and that was that. We walked downstairs where the boys were and made our way back outside. We found a creepy well that was all covered up. And then, all of a sudden, we heard that alarm clock start ticking again. But I know that I broke it, so it kind of spooked us out, but nothing major. We saw an outdoor cellar that we had gone into, and there was a child's boot, seemingly a girl's, with a bone inside the shoe. So we were like, okay, we're done for today. So my boyfriend and I were telling Amy and Neil about this cabin and what had happened when T and J came with us. So we decided that we were going to go later that day. The day that this encounter happened, Mark, Neil, Amy, and myself all went to the lake, packed a cooler with food and stuff like that, and probably spent about 5 hours or so at the lake, just eating and hanging out. We left the lake and stopped at Amy and Neil's homes, dropped the cooler off, which was in the trunk of the car, and then went on our way. After getting everything out of the trunk from our lake trip, we headed to my boyfriend's parents' house, where we parked the car and began our hour-long walk. We had flashlights, and that was it. The walk there was very uneventful. We had to walk through 2 huge drainage tunnels to get to this cabin. We make it there, and it wasn't dark out, but it seemed different this time. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but it was just different. We did come later in the day than previously, so I chalked it up to it being that. Just like last time, when we get inside, I decide to go upstairs and I ask Amy to come with me. I wanted to show her the socks in the wall, and I also wanted to check on that clock that I had broken on the last visit that I heard ticking outside previously. As we start to go up the stairs, there was this big crash, like something had been thrown or knocked over. Amy gets freaked out, and then out of nowhere, she books it outside and back down to the creek, yelling at Mark, Neil, and I to come on. I go chasing after her, and she's in tears, having a full-blown panic attack. She keeps talking, but I can't understand her. Finally, I get that she saw someone looking in the window at us. We tell the guys, and literally nobody is around. It's just the 4 of us. Since she's so distraught, we decide to just go ahead and leave. As we're walking back down the creek bed, heading back the same way we'd come, Mark and Neil are just kind of kicking over these huge rocks. We stop and realize that there are huge rocks, I would say boulders, standing right up in a line on the entryway down to the creek bed. They couldn't have been there, not even 20 minutes prior, because we would have noticed them when we were on our way there. So this seriously freaked us all out. This is not normal, and it's not natural. So we pick up the pace and start to haul ass out of there. We make it to the first drainage tunnel, and we turn on our flashlights. Literally none of them will turn on. 4 flashlights that worked perfectly fine on the way there. And now none of them will turn on. We were like, what is happening? So 30 minutes later, we're back at my boyfriend's parents' house where Amy and Neil had parked the car. Amy gets in the car because at this point she's just ready to go home and forget that this event ever happened. The rest of us are still outside the car. Suddenly, Amy gets out of the car, screaming and jumping up and down and flailing around. She's covered in ants. We were like, what the hell is going on? So we look, and they're coming from the back seat, from the trunk. Neil opens the trunk of his car, and laying in there is this huge, rusty, extremely old wool sock covered in ants. Now remember what I said earlier? We had been in and out of that trunk all day long, and there was nothing in that trunk when we left their house from dropping off the cooler. Now there's a wool sock covered in ants that covered the car? This was too much for any of us to wrap our heads around. Needless to say, we've never been back there, and personally, I will never go back. It turns out that the man who used to live in that cabin was named Hubert, and he was often called Huey. My boyfriend had actually been to the cabin once before I ever went, and he found these journals there. The man, well, let's just say he did some pretty terrible things to kids. His journals went into detail about it. Obviously, I'm not going into detail here. But looking back at that first Ouija board experience, Huey makes a lot more sense. This was honestly the first and only time that I had ever encountered something to this level. Like I said, I'll never go back. Even to this day, when I talk about it, I get goosebumps. I can't explain what happened that day, and I have no idea what Amy saw that scared her so badly in that window. But I do know that boulders do not stand straight up on their own in a line, and nobody could have done that fast enough. Nobody could have messed with the 4 flashlights either, because we had them in our hands the whole time, and no physical person could have put that dirty, old, ant-infested wool sock in Amy and Neil's car trunk. It was locked. So I guess the lesson I learned is if you're ever wandering through the woods and you come across a random cabin, just leave it alone. You never know who lived there, what they did, and who or what may still be there. Unfortunately, I think we learned that the very hard and unsettling way. My mom's side of the family lived in another town, about 7 hours away. We would visit from time to time. My aunt's houses were always haunted, and strange things were always happening there. I saw ghosts a lot. Well, this time, she lived at a ranch in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my grandma on my mom's side passed away. We went to stay at my aunt's house to visit, and later to go to the funeral. While we were visiting the first night, my older brother and cousins stayed up in the kitchen, cooking and talking. My mom, dad, and I were all in the far bedroom, down the hall from the kitchen. I was watching TV, and my parents were falling asleep. My brother called me into the kitchen and asked me if I wanted corn on the cob. I said no. He asked me to ask my mom if she wanted one. I walked back into the room and asked my mom, and she said no as well. I went back into the hallway and told my brother that mom didn't want any corn. But he just stared at me with huge eyes wide open. He just said, "Okay." I didn't think much about it at the time. I just thought that how he looked at me was really strange. The next day, my brother and I drove to town to get something to eat. That's when he told me, when I asked my mom if she wanted corn, that he saw a woman standing behind me. She followed me into the room. He thought it was my mom at first, but then the woman vanished. I told him mom and dad were laying in bed when that happened. That's why he was looking at me strangely. But he said that he didn't want to tell me that night because I would have been scared. We ended up getting a hotel the next night, and we didn't stay at my aunt's again. My brother was too freaked out. In May 2009, I had just broken up with my girlfriend of almost 3 years. We had moved from Calgary to Toronto, and we were still stuck living together after the breakup, as we didn't know many people in the city yet. Needless to say, the situation was pretty stressful and upsetting. So when a buddy I was going to school with at the time suggested a weekend camping and fishing trip, I jumped at the chance. He grew up in an area about an hour outside of Toronto called Flamborough. It's really beautiful. Lots of lush forest, farmers, fields, some small rivers and creeks. We decided to camp and fish along a creek called Grindstone Creek. It's close to some wetlands, and the fishing is supposed to be great. We ended up setting up our camp in what was probably a farmer's field. I'm guessing now that it was probably trespassing on our part, bordered by a gorgeous forest. We spent the evening fishing, shooting the breeze, and drinking some quality craft beer. As it got darker, we made a little fire and roasted potatoes and hot dogs. All in all, it was a really good night. We turned in just after midnight, and we shared a tent. My buddy fell asleep before me, and I stayed up playing on my phone until probably 1:30. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember was being woken up by a high-pitched yipping type of noise. I was kind of groggy, and it took me a moment to fully wake up. The yipping was incessant, and it sounded like a weird coyote. I laid there for a moment, listening, and then I started playing on my phone again. The noise was really annoying. I tried ignoring it, but it sounded like it was getting closer. Finally, it sounded like it had to be no more than 10 feet from the tent. At this point, I was getting a little unsettled. I had seen coyotes in Calgary before, and I thought of them as pretty harmless. They never looked much bigger than a smallish dog. But what if this one was rabid or something? What if it could smell our food? I have a pretty bad anxiety disorder, so I'm prone to worrying about these types of things. I nudged my buddy to see if he was awake, and he was. The noise had woken him up too. We discussed what to do about the coyote, as we hadn't brought anything to scare it off. No BB gun or anything. Finally, he decided he would shine the flashlight on it and holler a lot. Hopefully, that would scare it off. He unzipped the tent, and I watched him pointing the flashlight out into the darkness. I'll never forget what happened next. His legs suddenly went all wobbly, and he sort of stumbled backwards into the tent. He had a really dumbfounded look on his face. When he looked at me, he babbled, "It's not a coyote, it's a dude. It's some weird dude." Normally, I would have thought he was messing with me. I'm a huge wimp, and I scare easily. I won't even watch horror movies, so I'm an easy target. But I've never seen somebody, especially him, look that scared. And I never want to see that expression on anybody's face again. So I knew he wasn't pulling my leg. The weird yipping and howling type noises were still going on. And in retrospect, it really didn't sound like a coyote. But I guess in our groggy states, it was a way for our brains to make sense of it. Anyway, he kept telling me just to look out the tent flap to make sure he wasn't crazy. At this point, I was having a full-blown anxiety attack. My heart was racing and I felt like crap, but I had to look. So I slowly peeked out the flap and waited for my eyes to adjust. And that's when I saw him. He was standing only a few arms' lengths away from the tent. He was swaying a little and wearing a baseball cap. What made it awful, though, what was really creepy, was that he was wearing women's lingerie. That's when I knew that there was most likely something very wrong with this guy. I mean, mostly because he was making high-pitched yips at strangers in tents in the middle of the night. I pulled my head back inside the tent, and my buddy and I discussed what to do. Finally, we decided to just swear at the guy. My buddy started yelling obscenities, saying to go away and we're trying to sleep in here, but with more obscenities. The noise stopped. It was dead silent. And that's when we heard footsteps running toward the tent. They stopped right outside of it, but we didn't waste any time. We started yelling again, "We have cell phones in here. If you don't go away, we're going to call the cops." With that, we heard him walk by the tent and head off. It sounded like he was moving toward the road. Needless to say, we laid awake, petrified until the first sign of sunlight. And then we hightailed it out of there. We discussed her experience on the way home, and we're both pretty embarrassed about how scared we got. It definitely wasn't normal for either of us. I think because we were both ashamed of how we let some weirdo freak us out so much, we never really talked about it since. But either way, it was wild. I was talking to an old friend about maybe going on an impromptu ghost hunt this month, and during the conversation, we reminisced about some of the creepy stuff that we had experienced over the years. We remembered a particular event that stuck out with us, and it's one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. The story begins with my friend, who we'll call T, and myself searching a hidden attic-like space in his house for a supposed stash of money allegedly left there by a previous tenant. Truth be told, I think that was just a story his mom told us to get us off the Xbox for a while. It was the heyday of Halo, and she was probably just sick of us sitting in front of his TV. But whether or not the story she told us was true, we wound up in this small and low-ceilinged attic space, which could only be accessed by a tiny door hidden in the wooden panels in the wall. We'd known about the door for a while, but had never bothered to go in, mostly because the door seemed like it had been sealed somehow, and we couldn't be bothered with actually using our brains and finding something to pry it open. But the prospect of finding free money in a dusty old room was too much, so we called a few friends to come help search the place. And after a few pries with a putty knife and a flathead screwdriver, we cracked the door open and began to explore. At first it didn't seem like much was in there. Some old clothes and papers scattered about, and a desk in the corner. But through the gloom and dust, we could see something against the far wall, which turned out to be a very old cot of some kind. It was either busted in half or was meant to fold in half, but either way it was folded over on itself, and we could see something covered in cloth and sandwiched between the two halves. Of course, we wouldn't be good treasure hunters if we didn't look at the covered thing, so we start making our way over to the folded cot. I take a few steps forward, and my foot goes right through the floor like it's made of wet paper. Luckily, though T was right behind me, he had very quick reflexes. His hand shot out and grabbed the back of my shirt to keep me from falling forward, and probably all the way through the floor. We took a second to laugh at the situation and realized that we should probably stick to the sides of the room, as the center was most likely the weakest, and probably the most likely to collapse under our weight. So we tiptoe all the way around the wall of the room until we get to the cot, where we start unfolding it to get to the covered thing. This is where things got strange. As soon as we touched the cot, the room got very cold, which was odd because we were in an attic in mid-July. At the time, we thought nothing of it. We were certain we had found the stash. We were moments away from being rich. So we unfold the cot, which took all of our combined strength from how rusted and decrepit the thing was. Honestly, I was surprised it didn't just crumble to dust at the first touch. Finally, we got it unfolded and found that it was, in fact, a decently sized wall mirror that had been wrapped in a sheet or a thin blanket. As soon as we uncovered the mirror, the tiny door that we had come through slowly swung shut. Again, we didn't think anything about it. Must have been a gust of air or something. We were a little disheartened by the lack of money, but T's mom had sent us in there with her camera to take pictures of anything interesting, so she could see what was inside, since she wouldn't be going in herself. So we snap a couple of pictures of the mirror, the cot, and the random debris lying around. Now here it's important to note that the mirror's reflective surface was absolutely caked with dust. You could barely tell that the mirror was a mirror, the dust was so thick. Yet the base of the mirror, which looked and felt like it was made of some sort of ceramic, was practically pristine. When I say the base, I mean the part of the mirror in which the reflective surface was set, not the actual bottom of the mirror. I found that to be very odd, as the whole mirror had been covered by the sheet. So why would any of it be dusty at all, let alone just a specific part like that? So we snap the pictures and are about to call it quits when we hear the dogs barking downstairs. That usually meant that somebody was at the door. So we carefully make our way along the walls and out of the room to head downstairs. It turned out to be our friend, who we'll call B, who had come to help us search for the supposed stash. After we told her about the attic room, she wanted to see it for herself. So naturally, we took her up and showed her the tiny door. Before we even set foot into the room, we told her about the crappy floor and to only walk along the walls. Of course, she either didn't take us seriously or she just didn't understand what we had said, because she takes a couple of steps toward the cot and falls almost all the way through the floor, practically right through the small hole that I had created earlier. So she's sitting there with her upper body still in the attic and her legs dangling down through the ceiling of the kitchen. It was at this moment that I heard one of the most hilarious sentences I've ever heard. Through the now large hole in the floor, we could hear T's mom on the phone with someone when she said in a very flat and nonchalant tone, "I have to go now, there are children falling through my ceiling." So we get B out of the floor and have a good laugh about the situation, and once we're sure she was okay, we all agreed it was probably best to just leave the room alone before we caused any more damage. We get out and all the way downstairs when T pipes up that he'd forgotten the camera and a flashlight in there. So I agreed to go back in with him to grab them. We thought it wouldn't take but a second, as he remembered setting them both down on the floor, close to the hole, when we were helping B get out. But when we got there, we were a little confused. We couldn't see the camera or the flashlight anywhere. We looked all over the floor, thinking maybe we'd kicked them around on our way out, or when we were helping B, but they weren't there. We were about to go check if he had maybe set them outside the door or something when we were shutting it behind us, when T stopped dead in his tracks and whispered my name. I looked over, and in an instant, I knew what had made him stop. The mirror was covered up with the sheet again, only this time the outline of the camera and flashlight could be seen under the cover. We stood there and stared at it for a good minute or two before T got brave enough and started making his way along the wall to get over to the cot. I followed on very shaky legs, and I watched as he pulled the cover off the mirror to reveal that his camera and flashlight were indeed hidden under the sheet, along with the words "Help me" scrawled in the dust beside them. It was like something out of a horror movie, and honestly, if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't believe it. The nope factor must have been too much for T, because he snatched up his stuff and made a beeline for the door, with me close behind. We slammed the door shut behind us and never went back in. T's mom thought we were making the whole thing up, until we went back and looked through the camera. We had pictures of the cot and the mirror, both before and after messing with them. One of the folded cot with the covered mirror still hidden, one of the open cot with the covered mirror revealed, and one of the uncovered mirror, which showed no writing in the dust. But there was one final picture which convinced his mom that we were telling the truth, and that she should never open that door again. The last picture was taken seemingly from atop the cot, and clearly showed the giant hole where B had fallen through, which meant that after T had put the camera down so that we could get B out of the hole, someone else had picked it up from beside the hole after we left, carried it and a flashlight over to the mirror, and snapped a picture after setting it down. That had to have happened very quickly, because we were only out of the room for 3 minutes at most. T realized he'd forgotten his camera almost as soon as we'd gotten downstairs. The only ones that were there were T, his mom, myself, and B. His dad and older brother were at work, and even if they had come home, they would have had to pass us on the stairs to get up to the attic. There's just no way that I can logically explain the writing on the mirror, and to this day, I still think about what was in that attic with us. My wife and I bought a house in the country, next to a Civil War battlefield in Northern Virginia. The original property was a 4,000-acre plantation that was subdivided into multiple smaller farms. The original plantation house of the 4,000-acre property was situated on our lot 15 yards behind the house, with all of its stone foundation, chimney, and well. Our house was built in the mid-'80s by hand by the previous owner, who worked for NASA and IBM. He passed away after a battle with cancer. We fell in love with this house and property. You could tell it was the man's life's work. After purchasing the house for a great price, we walked the property with his widow and oldest adult son. They walked the entire property and house with us, but what I found odd is that both the widow and the son refused to enter the half-unfinished downstairs basement, adamantly. This became a long story with too many experiences to list. My wife and I, over the course of 5 years, and the friends and family that stayed the night with us, all experienced poltergeist phenomena. From the TV changing itself to the NASA space station channel regularly showing up, the cabinet slamming, footsteps heard throughout the house, an out-of-body sound of somebody clear as day whistling for a dog. These things were heard regularly by everybody. Sometimes the whistling would be right over our shoulder, in our ear, almost like it was messing with us. Sometimes while you were in the shower, the same thing would happen, which was altogether unsettling. One time in the basement, alone, I was painting the ceiling on a ladder. I heard the double whistle right in my ear, over my shoulder, so loudly and clearly that I jumped off the ladder. I backed myself up against the wall to see what was coming. I was so freaked out that I actually ran out the back door to the backyard, and I went around the house to get back upstairs instead of running through the basement to get to the stairs. I'm not easily shaken by any means, but that was too much. My dog would always stare and bark at the top corner of the family room. He refused to go downstairs. I would pick him up and physically carry him downstairs, only to have him sprint right back up and bark at us from the top of the stairs until we came back up. My wife has had a hand brush across the back of her neck multiple times. Sinks, lights turning on by themselves right in front of us. Keys and other important small items would go missing, never to be found again, no matter how hard we searched every inch of the house. I would wake up at about 4:30 a.m. to go to work, and I would regularly find the same 2 doors leading out back toward the old plantation house, wide open with bugs and mosquitoes flying in for Lord knows how long. Maybe all night after we made sure to lock them. We don't know. My mother-in-law was awoken one night by a man's voice asking her, "Who are you?" While living in a haunted house, you really have no choice but to ignore the activity. We got used to it, and it would come and go in cycles. We never felt a bad presence or saw any apparitions. We always figured it was the old owner, and would always joke to each other, "Well, there goes Mr. Copper." But one day, I was home alone, laying on the couch in broad daylight after a long day of work. I heard a bang so loud that it actually shook the entire 3,000 square foot home. It sounded like it came from our large attic. I immediately jumped up and thought one of the large oak trees around the house had crashed through the roof. I sprinted outside to assess the damage, but the roof was completely fine, no downed trees. My second thought was our AC unit, which is in the attic, may have just fallen off its pedestals and crashed through the ceiling. I grabbed a flashlight and scoured the entire attic to find nothing wrong. Definitely no earthquake in the area, and no other neighbors felt anything. It seems like the activity in the house has picked up 10 times in the last month, while we're there getting ready for it to be sold. It's been 2 years since we moved, and we've had no activity since. but not a day goes by where I don't think about the strange activity in the house, and I always wonder what shook everything from the attic.